Hi there. I'm Celine. My mom kicked me out of her wedding, her big day, said I wasn't good enough to be part of it. But that wasn't the worst part. Behind the flowers, the fancy dresses, the picture-perfect smiles, they were hiding something bigger. They'd spent years erasing me, not just from the guest list, but from the family, from the future. And when I finally walked away, everything they'd built came crashing down. But here's the thing. When your own mother turns you into the villain of her fairy tale, what choice do you have? You think the wedding was the real drama? Wait until you hear what happened after. It was almost closing time at my flower shop in Charleston when my phone buzzed on the counter. The soft hum of the AC blended with the faint scent of lilies and damp eucalyptus hanging in the air. I was trimming the last bouquet of the day, the kind of peaceful moment I usually enjoyed, until that text shattered everything. Celine, I think it's better if you don't attend the wedding. It's for the best. For a second, I thought I'd misread it. My fingers froze over the stems, my thumb still pressing the shears mid-snap. I blinked, rereading those cold, calculated words from my own mother. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was real. She didn't want me there, on her wedding day. I stared at the screen as if I could will the words to change, but they didn't. They sat there, flat and final, like a verdict handed down in a courtroom I didn't even know I was being tried in. It wasn't the first time my mother, Drusilla, had decided I wasn't good enough. But this was different. This was the final nail. My chest tightened, a slow, dull ache spreading beneath my ribs. I glanced around my tiny shop, where every corner held memories of me holding this family together. And now, they had decided to move forward without me. I set the shears down and leaned against the counter, the weight of the text crashing over me like cold water. Then, as if my mind needed to torture me further, the memory hit. It was a month ago, during one of those early May mornings when the Charleston air smelled like rain and magnolia. I had just finished arranging peonies when my mother walked into the shop, elegant as always, her smile sharp as a knife. She didn't waste time. "Celine, we need to talk," she said, voice tight, eyes avoiding mine. I wiped my hands and waited. "You don't really fit the image we're going for," she continued, tone so polished it cut deeper. "The bridesmaid thing? Maybe it's best you step back." The words sliced through me that day like paper cuts, thin, precise, and somehow more painful because of how politely she delivered them. I'd laughed awkwardly, thinking it was a bad joke, but her face told me it wasn't. Now, a month later, she had made it official. Not only was I not standing beside her, I wasn't welcome at all. I walked slowly to the back of the shop, shutting off the lights one by one, letting the shadows creep in as the sun dipped below the Charleston skyline. My legs felt heavier with each step, my chest tightening as my mind kept replaying that message. How did I get here? How did I become the outsider in my own family? My mind flashed back to the countless nights I stayed up, covering rent when Mom was short, helping my sister Aurelia clean up her messes, taking care of everyone while no one ever thought to check if I was okay. And now, I was nothing more than a liability in their perfect little narrative. My phone buzzed again. Aurelia had posted a photo on Instagram. The perfect family wedding, no drama, just love. The caption sliced deeper than any text. The picture? My mother, Aurelia, and a circle of smiling bridesmaids laughing under Charleston's soft evening glow. I wasn't in it. I wasn't even mentioned. That's when something inside me shifted. Something quiet, heavy, but sharp. I locked the shop, the keys cold against my palm. My footsteps echoed on the pavement as I walked home, every sound amplified in the thick, humid night. By the time I reached my apartment, I didn't feel sadness anymore. I felt hollow. Standing in front of my bathroom mirror, I studied my reflection like I was looking at a stranger. My voice cracked the silence when I whispered, "If they've erased me, maybe it's time I erase them too." No more waiting to be invited. No more hoping for crumbs. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. my mind racing until exhaustion finally dragged me under. The next morning, I woke up to a name I hadn't heard in months lighting up my phone. The name glowing on my phone screen stopped me cold. Junia. I hadn't heard from her in months, not since that last family dinner, where she quietly slid me an extra plate and murmured, "You shouldn't let them treat you like this." She was the only one who ever looked me in the eye when the rest of them pretended I wasn't even there. So when her name popped up at 7 in the morning, I already knew it wasn't good. I answered anyway. "Junia?" Her voice came through, hushed, almost apologetic. "Celine, I didn't want to be the one to say this, but Mom asked me to call you." My stomach dropped. "She wanted me to make sure you don't show up today," Junia continued quickly, as if ripping off a Band-Aid. "She said it's better for everyone's peace." There it was. That phrase again. Peace. As if my existence had ever disturbed theirs, like a storm cloud ruining their sunny little world. I didn't respond right away. I let the words settle in the silence, heavy and sharp. "Message received," I finally said, my voice flat. Junia tried to soften the blow. "Celine, I don't agree with her. You don't deserve this." But I'd already tuned her out. It wasn't about whether I deserved it anymore. They'd made their decision. After the call ended, I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the sunlight slicing through the blinds. Outside, Charleston was stirring awake, church bells ringing, birdsong floating on the breeze, the hum of wedding preparations everywhere. It was supposed to be my mother's perfect day, and apparently it required me to vanish. The walls of my apartment suddenly felt too small, the air too heavy. I grabbed my keys and jacket without thinking, needing to move, to breathe, to not feel the weight of that phone call pressing on my chest. I drove aimlessly through the streets of Charleston, past tourists holding coffee cups, couples in pastel clothes, friends gathering for a celebration I was explicitly uninvited to. Every corner of this city held some memory of me. Every street whispered of the years I spent holding my family's pieces together. And now I wasn't even an afterthought. I don't know what made me do it, but before noon, I found myself parked across the street from the Belmont Hotel, the wedding venue. I had no intention of going inside, but curiosity is a cruel thing. It doesn't let you look away when you should. So I stood there, arms crossed tightly over my chest, and watched. Guests arrived in clusters, laughing, posing for photos. Everyone perfectly dressed, perfectly happy. And then I saw her. My mother. Drusilla moved through the crowd like a queen, her veil pinned perfectly, her smile rehearsed. She was speaking to the hotel manager, but her voice carried across the street, slicing through the morning like glass. "If she sets foot in here, throw her out. She's not family." She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. The words hit harder than I expected, like a punch to the ribs. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching her turn away like I was nothing but a shadow. After a few long minutes, I finally climbed back into my car, the numbness crawling over me like a second skin. I drove without direction, the streets of Charleston blurring past. Hours slipped away without me noticing. By the time the sun began to fall behind the skyline, I found myself at the waterfront. The boardwalk was nearly empty now, a few tourists lingering, the sound of seagulls fading into the breeze. I walked slowly toward the edge of the beach, the tide stretching out like something soft and cruel at the same time. And standing there, with the horizon burning gold in front of me, it finally hit me. They'd spent years carving out their perfect little world, and when I didn't fit their picture, they erased me. Fine. If they wanted me gone, I could disappear. But not on their terms. I took one long breath, letting the ocean air settle deep in my lungs. If they wanted me erased, I whispered to no one, I'll vanish, but on my own terms. That night, back in my apartment, the ache in my chest hadn't disappeared, but it felt different, heavier, sharper. And finally, I reached for the envelope Caspian had left me weeks ago, the one I'd ignored, unopened, because I wasn't ready to face whatever truth it carried. I broke the seal and unfolded the papers inside. And everything changed. I unfolded the envelope with the kind of care you'd give to something fragile, something dangerous. Caspian's handwriting stared back at me, clean, precise, almost clinical. Inside was a copy of a marriage contract. At first glance, it looked like any formal agreement. Typed lines, neat signatures, legal jargon designed to put people to sleep. But as I read, my pulse started to pound in my ears. There it was, buried deep in the clauses. Upon the completion of marriage, all shared assets, including the family estate and financial holdings, would fall solely under the control of Silas Wren, my mother's soon-to-be husband. A quiet breath slipped past my lips. I read it again, slower this time, tracing each word like I was peeling back the skin of a wound. My name wasn't there. Aurelia's name wasn't there. Only theirs, Drusilla and Silas, binding themselves together in a contract that effectively erased both her daughters from the picture. It wasn't just about the wedding anymore. This wasn't some emotional fallout or family spat. This was calculated. I leaned back on my sofa, the soft hum of the ceiling fan suddenly too loud in the silence. My mind swirled, images flashing, the cold text from Mom, Aurelia's picture-perfect Instagram post, the public rejection outside the Belmont Hotel. It wasn't personal, it was business. My phone buzzed again. I ignored it. I needed air. Pulling on a sweatshirt, I stepped outside into the Charleston night. The humidity clung to my skin like sweat, the streets mostly empty except for the occasional car rolling by. I walked without thinking, down streets I'd memorized over the years, until I reached the little cafe Caspian and I used to meet at after late shifts. That's when the memory hit. 2 weeks before the wedding, I had dropped by Mom's house to deliver floral samples she asked for. She wasn't home, but the front door was unlocked. I'd walked in, placed the samples on the kitchen counter, and noticed the study door slightly ajar. Out of habit, curiosity, or maybe something more, I peeked inside. That's when I saw it. That same marriage contract sitting on Silas's desk. It had caught my eye not because of the thick stack of legal papers, but because my mother's name was there, without mine or Aurelia's anywhere in sight. Back then, I hadn't thought much of it. I was used to being overlooked, but now, standing in the middle of an empty street, it all clicked like dominoes falling. Caspian's voice echoed in my head from a conversation weeks ago when he'd warned me. Celine, Silas did this before. 2 wives, both left with nothing but bills and heartbreak. I hadn't wanted to believe him then. I wanted to believe my mother wouldn't fall for a man who'd used, drained, and discarded women like expired credit cards. But that contract in my hand proved otherwise. I walked home slower than usual, my steps heavy with realization. By the time I reached my apartment, the ache inside me had sharpened into something colder. They didn't just leave me off the guest list. They'd left me off the entire future they were building. One where I didn't exist. Not just emotionally, but legally, financially, permanently. Every little slight, every offhand comment over the years, every time Mom brushed past me in favor of Aurelia, they weren't accidents. They were conditioning. They wanted me gone long before this wedding. The wedding was just the final act. I dropped onto the edge of my bed, staring at the ceiling fan slicing the air. They didn't just erase me, they sold me out. Somewhere beneath the dull ache in my chest, something cracked open. Not sadness, not grief. Anger. Real, bone-deep, unshakable anger. For the first time in years, I let it settle in my veins like a spark waiting for flame. This isn't over. The next morning, a new rumor about me started spreading like wildfire, and I knew exactly who lit the match. The rumor spread like wildfire, faster than I expected, but exactly how I should have known it would. By noon, 3 different people had sent me the same message, as if I hadn't already heard it whispered beneath the breath of every family member who smiled too wide and cared too little. Celine's unstable. She threatened to ruin the wedding. She's out of control. It would have been almost funny if it hadn't felt so familiar, the way my family always twisted the truth until it became a weapon. At first, I thought about letting it burn itself out. Let them talk. Let them paint me as the villain. But then Junia texted, "You should come tonight. Rehearsal dinner at the Belmont. Be seen." I stared at the screen, wondering why I should even bother. Why walk straight into the lion's den when I already knew they wanted me mauled? But something inside me, something sharp and stubborn, told me I needed to show up. Not to explain, not to plead, but to remind them I was still standing. That evening, the Belmont was glowing like a Christmas postcard. White lights strung around the columns, waiters gliding between tables with trays of champagne, everything curated to look perfect. I slipped in quietly, unnoticed at first. But eyes always find you when they want you to disappear. Caspian found me near the doorway. He didn't say much, just gave me that look, half warning, half worried. "You sure?" he asked under his breath. "They don't get to write my ending," I replied. The evening unfolded like a play. Laughter where it belonged, fake smiles exchanged like business cards. Until the groom took the microphone. Silas stood tall, smug, one arm casually draped around my mother, like he already owned her. And everything else. "To family," he started, voice honey-sweet. "Those who know when their time is over." The guests laughed, politely, nervously, but his eyes locked on mine when he added, "Some people just don't know when they're no longer needed." The smile never left his lips, but the message hit like a slap. I kept my face still, my hand tight around the glass. Then my mother took the mic. "Every mother dreams of children who bring them joy," she said sweetly. "Sadly, we don't always get what we want." Her eyes didn't leave mine. The room went silent. No one said a word. Caspian leaned in. "They're trying to break you tonight," he whispered. I set my glass down carefully and stood. The chatter faded. Forks paused midair. I walked toward the exit without looking back, until I did. My voice stayed calm even. "Be careful," I said, meeting both their eyes. "Even shadows have limits." And then I left. Outside, Charleston felt like a different world. The hum of traffic, the quiet pulse of life moving forward like nothing had happened inside that ballroom. I kept walking, letting the air cool the weight pressing on my chest. At the corner, beneath the street lamp glow, I stopped and breathed it all in. That night, lying awake, staring at the ceiling, something inside me shifted. The next move would be mine. And this time, I wouldn't play nice. 3 days before the wedding, my phone lit up before sunrise. The city outside my window was still dark, the air heavy with the kind of stillness that only comes right before something terrible happens. When I reached for the phone, half expecting another empty apology or a cold demand, I found Caspian's name instead. His message was short. "Aurelia's telling people you're trying to ruin the wedding." I sat up, the weight of those words sinking straight to my stomach like a stone. Of course she was. It wasn't enough to exclude me. Now they needed to burn my name, too. I stared at the screen, rereading the message over and over as if it would suddenly make sense. It didn't. By mid-morning, I saw the evidence for myself. 2 posts, subtle but clear enough if you knew how to read between the lines. One from one of Aurelia's friends. "Some people really can't stand seeing others happy." Another from a distant cousin. "Family drama is exhausting. Let people celebrate without your baggage." I didn't need a name tagged to know who they meant. I spent the next hour pacing the length of my living room, the same sentence rattling in my head like static. "She's telling everyone you're trying to ruin the wedding." It was the final push. Not Mom, not Silas, Aurelia. The person I thought would at least hesitate before driving the knife in. Before I could talk myself out of it, I dialed her number. She picked up after the second ring. "Celine," Aurelia said, voice cool like the static buzz of a radio signal I'd forgotten how to tune. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, skipping past the small talk, my throat tight with something dangerously close to grief. She didn't miss a beat. "You're jealous, Celine. You always have been." I blinked, the words slicing sharper than I expected. You hate seeing Mom happy, she continued, like she'd been rehearsing the line for weeks. You can't stand not being the center of attention. The laugh that escaped me wasn't soft. It was bitter, hollow. You really believe that? You can't help yourself, she said. You live for chaos. I swallowed the lump forming at the back of my throat, my hand tightening around the edge of the kitchen counter. She meant every word. She wasn't saying it to provoke me. She genuinely believed I was the villain in her story. We ended the call without resolution, her voice turning cold, mine turning to ice. That evening, after I closed the shop and the streets began to empty, my phone buzzed again. Aurelia, one message this time, no flourish, no pretense. If you really love Mom, you won't show up. Don't ruin her day. I stared at it longer than I should have, the words sinking into my bones like frostbite. If you really love Mom, as if love meant stepping aside quietly while they erased me. I set the phone down, walked to the window, and watched the city lights flicker in the distance. I'd spent years making myself smaller so they could feel big. I'd spent even longer hoping they'd eventually see me. But this wasn't misunderstanding anymore. It was strategy. I walked back to the counter, picked up my phone, and typed slowly, deliberately. If you keep pushing me out, don't be surprised when I stop staying quiet. I hit send and set the phone face down. Tomorrow, they'd understand what it meant when the quiet one finally spoke. The cafe was quiet when I arrived the next morning. One of those downtown places tucked between old brick buildings, smelling faintly of espresso and polished wood. The kind of place where no one paid attention to you unless you asked for it. Caspian was already there, seated at a corner table, a manila folder resting on the table like a loaded weapon. He glanced up when I walked in, and without a word, slid the folder toward me as I sat down. I pulled it open, expecting receipts or half-hearted gossip. But it wasn't that. Inside were copies of documents I hadn't seen before. Detailed records. A full copy of the marriage contract I'd first glimpsed weeks ago, but this time annotated, highlighted. And stapled neatly behind it were bank statements, court records, legal filings, a trail of Silas's past. 2 former marriages, 2 women left in financial ruin. Assets transferred quietly, systematically. I scanned the pages, my heart pounding faster with every line I read. My mother's name, the date of the wedding, the clause that effectively gave Silas control of everything, including what should have been mine and Aurelia's inheritance. When I looked up, Caspian was watching me carefully, his hands wrapped around his coffee mug. "Why are you doing this?" I asked quietly. He exhaled slowly. "Because someone should have protected you a long time ago." I swallowed, unsure how to carry the weight of that simple truth. "You've spent your whole life cleaning up their mess," Caspian continued. "Maybe it's time to clean your own slate." The words settled over me like an anchor. Heavy, grounding. For years, I'd been the one who showed up. The one who fixed things. The one who swallowed her pride so everyone else could save face. Maybe it was time to stop playing that part. I folded the folder closed carefully, like sealing something fragile, and stood. "Thank you," I said, meaning it. He nodded once. "Whatever you do next, don't do it for them. Do it for you." I left the cafe and walked back to my apartment, the folder clutched tight in my hands. The sun was high by then, the streets humming with people preparing for the wedding weekend. Delivery trucks, florists, caterers rushing in and out of venues. Charleston was dressing itself up for a show I was never supposed to be in. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and stared at the screen for a long time. And then, without hesitation, I picked up the phone and called my family's lawyer. It took 3 rings before he answered, his voice formal but polite. "Celine? What can I do for you?" I told him everything. I sent him the documents Caspian had gathered, every highlighted line, every damning clause. I explained the pattern, the way it had happened before, the way it was happening again. When I finished, there was a long pause on the line. "You understand what you're asking me to do," he said carefully. I do. You're aware this could tear your family apart? I almost laughed. That ship had sailed a long time ago. I want this marriage stopped, I said calmly, and I want them to know exactly why. The lawyer hesitated. I can prepare an injunction, but it will cause a public scene. Good. Let it be public. Let the truth crawl out into the light. Before we ended the call, I added one last thing. Make sure they can't erase me this time. That night, I slept differently. Not well, but with a strange kind of calm, like something inside me had finally settled. The next day, as the guests arrived in their finest clothes, the first cracks in their perfect day started to show. By noon, the Belmont Hotel looked like something out of a Southern wedding magazine. Pristine white arches, silk ribbons fluttering in the breeze, and guests arriving in their finest clothes, sipping champagne, as if nothing in the world could possibly go wrong. But I knew better. From the window of the cafe across the street, I watched them arrive. Uncles in pressed suits, cousins in pastel dresses, old family friends lining up to witness the show. They had no idea the curtain was about to fall. Inside the hotel ballroom, my mother stood radiant under the chandelier light, veil pinned perfectly, lips stretched into a smile wide enough to crack. Silas stood beside her, smug and polished as ever, one hand resting possessively on her back. The picture of happiness, if you didn't look too close. Somewhere behind them, Caspian lingered near the back of the room, his posture casual, but his gaze sharp, scanning every corner like he was waiting for the sky to cave in. It didn't take long. The first sign came in the form of two men in dark suits slipping past the crowd, moving straight toward the front. I saw the shift ripple across the room, whispers, heads turning, the tension sharp enough to slice through silk. One of the men, our family lawyer, approached my mother, leaning in close enough that only she and Silas could hear. The smile slid right off her face. Silas's jaw clenched so hard I could see it from across the street. The announcement came minutes later. The wedding ceremony had been temporarily delayed due to unforeseen legal circumstances. I almost laughed at how politely they phrased it, as if this wasn't a bomb dropped in the middle of their perfect day. The whispers spread like wildfire. By the time I crossed the street and slipped quietly into the hotel lobby, the ballroom was already unraveling. Guests shuffled uneasily, murmuring behind cupped hands. Phones were out, messages flying faster than the waitstaff could refill the champagne, and then the doors to the side hallway burst open. Silas stormed in, his face red, voice rising over the chaos. "This is her!" he shouted, pointing toward me like I was a criminal on trial. "She planted this! This is her revenge." Eyes turned toward me like floodlights. I didn't flinch. I met his gaze evenly, the calm in my chest unfamiliar but steady. People were recording now. I could see the glint of phones held up like shields, capturing every moment. Aurelia's voice came next, sharp and brittle over the crowd noise. She wasn't even in the room. It was a voicemail buzzing on my phone seconds after Silas's outburst. "You ruined everything," she snapped. "I hope you're happy. You destroyed the only family you had left." I listened to it twice, letting the words wash over me like cold rain. The thing about blame is that it always finds the easiest target. Junia's message came not long after. "They're all blaming you," she wrote. "But you did the right thing." Somewhere deep inside, I wanted to believe her. But in that moment, standing in the middle of the wreckage, all I felt was exhaustion. I thought it was over. I thought the worst had passed. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement at the front of the room. My mother had grabbed the microphone. The air in the ballroom felt heavier the moment my mother's fingers wrapped around the microphone. Her smile was gone, her posture stiff. It wasn't the poised, gracious host everyone had seen earlier. It was a woman unraveling, thread by thread, in front of an audience too stunned to look away. I stood frozen near the back, breath caught halfway in my throat. She cleared her throat, voice slicing through the nervous murmurs like broken glass. "You all came here today," she began, her tone shaking but forced into something sweet, "to witness love, to celebrate new beginnings. Some people nodded politely, unsure where this was going. But what no one tells you, she continued, voice rising, is that family isn't always what it looks like in pictures. A pause, a shift. Her gaze snapped to me across the room, sharp as a blade. From the moment she was born, my mother said, her voice cracking but clear, Celine has been nothing but a burden. The words hit harder than I expected, like someone had knocked the wind clean out of me. The entire ballroom fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop between the gasps and uncomfortable shuffling. For a moment, I swore the chandelier above us flickered, like even the lights couldn't stand what was happening. Somewhere near the front, Caspian's jaw tightened. Junia stood frozen, her phone forgotten in her hand. I could feel everyone's eyes shift to me. The invisible daughter, the problem child, now painted plainly for all to see. I don't know how long I stood there, my heart pounding loud in my ears, before something inside me snapped. Not in anger, not even in sadness, just finality. I took a breath, straightened my shoulders, and walked slowly, deliberately, toward the front of the room. The crowd parted like water. When I reached the edge of the dance floor, I looked up at my mother, who still clutched the microphone like it was the only thing holding her up. "You wanted me erased?" I said, my voice steady, clear. "Congratulations!" I stepped back, sweeping my gaze across the stunned, whispering guests. "I'm gone." Without waiting for her reply, without so much as a glance toward Silas or Aurelia, I turned and walked away. The sound of my heels on the marble echoed louder than the shocked silence. Outside, the Charleston sun had begun to sink, the sky awash in amber and lavender streaks. The evening breeze wrapped around me like a promise of something better. By the time I reached the street, I heard the commotion behind me, more shouting, more chaos, but none of it mattered anymore. Later that night, I heard the rest through text messages and voicemails I didn't bother answering. Silas had left immediately after the ceremony collapsed, vanishing without a trace, taking with him whatever was left of their carefully curated fairy tale. The guests had scattered, many of them whispering about betrayal, scandal, bad blood. My mother's phone, according to Junia, had been ringing nonstop with reporters, relatives, friends who suddenly didn't want to be associated with the disaster. Aurelia didn't reach out, not a word, not even another blame-laced voicemail. Everything they'd built, the image, the performance, the illusion, crumbled in one afternoon. And I'd walked away from the wreckage without looking back. Weeks later, I received one last message, and it wasn't from the person I expected. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the message came. The sky over Charleston was gray that day, heavy with the kind of spring rain that threatened but never quite fell. I was sorting through invoices at my desk, half listening to a podcast playing low in the background, when my phone buzzed against the wooden surface. It was from Aurelia. I stared at the screen for a long moment before opening it. "Mom's not doing well. She keeps talking about you." That was all it said. No apology, no anger, no punctuation, just a sentence hanging like an unfinished thought. I set the phone down and leaned back, feeling the weight of those words settle in my chest like wet sand. For weeks after the wedding collapsed, I hadn't heard a thing from either of them. I thought that silence was the end. Apparently, it wasn't. That evening, I met Caspian at a small bar near the waterfront. He slid into the booth across from me, a file tucked beneath his arm. Without a word, he passed it over. Inside was a USB drive and a short printed transcript. "One of the old housekeepers sent this to me," he explained quietly. "She thought you should know." I plugged the drive into my laptop when I got home. The recording wasn't long, just under 3 minutes, but it felt like a punch to the stomach. My mother's voice, unmistakable, cold as ice, even on tape. "Celine's unstable. She ruins everything she touches. That's why I had to keep her away." The same lie, the same cruel branding, only this time spoken casually, to someone she thought didn't matter. That's where it started. The whispers, the rumors, the unspoken explanation that made it easier for people to justify my absence at every family gathering, every milestone. Not because I was difficult, but because it was easier to believe I was broken. I closed the laptop and sat there in the dim light, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It didn't destroy me. It just made everything make sense. A few days later, I drove out to the old neighborhood, past streets that used to feel like home. I parked a block away from my mother's building, stepped out, and stood there for a long time, staring at the front door I'd walked through 1,000 times before. But I didn't go in. There was nothing left to say. Somewhere between the betrayal and the lies, and the years of bending myself into shapes that would never be enough, I'd finally stopped needing her to see me. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Sometimes, it just means letting yourself live again. Before I left, I pulled out my phone and typed one last message. I hope one day you can be happy without needing to hurt me first. I didn't wait for a reply. Weeks passed. The city moved on, the gossip faded, the scandal became old news, and I started over. I reopened my flower shop, smaller this time, tucked into a quieter street, where the customers came not because of who I used to be, but because of what I could offer now. Caspian stopped by often, usually with coffee. Junia sent pictures of her kids, messages filled with laughter and updates. A different kind of family. One I chose. Some wounds don't heal perfectly, but they stop bleeding eventually. That evening, as I locked up the shop and stepped outside into the cool Charleston night, I smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because I finally knew it didn't have to be. For so long, I believed that family meant sacrificing yourself to keep the peace, that if I bent far enough, stayed quiet long enough, maybe one day they'd finally see me. But here's the truth no one tells you. Sometimes, family isn't who shares your blood. It's who shows up when the room is empty, who listens without expecting you to shrink yourself to fit their story. Walking away wasn't easy. It never is. But peace doesn't come from waiting for people who keep proving they don't value you. It comes from finally valuing yourself. And now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever stayed too long in a place, a relationship, a family that kept asking you to be less just so they could feel more? What would happen if, for once, you chose yourself? Drop a 1 in the comments if this story made you stop and think about your own boundaries. Or tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story traveled. And if this story wasn't for you, that's okay too. Let me know why. Your voice matters here. And if you want to hear more real stories about family, love, loss, and finding yourself again, hit that subscribe button and join this little community we're building. Because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to find a place where we belong. Hi, my name is Ethan Monroe, and on my 24th birthday, my parents didn't celebrate me. Instead, they threw a lavish party for my sister's new job. I walked into my family's grand estate expecting, at the very least, a cake. A quiet dinner. A moment that acknowledged me. Instead, I was greeted with banners, champagne glasses clinking, and a massive cake that read, "Congratulations, Sophia." No one even mentioned my birthday. But the party wasn't the worst part. It was the deception. The years of being overlooked, of being told I wasn't enough. The realization that my own parents had drained my inheritance, the money my grandfather left for me, to fund her career. I should have seen it coming. The condescending looks, the dismissive comments about my dreams as a writer, the way my father would say, "You should be more like Sophia." But that night, on the eve of my birthday, everything became painfully clear. I was never the priority. I was never even a consideration. But why? Why did they take from me to give to her? And what else have they been hiding? I thought I knew my family. I was wrong. The air inside the Monroe estate carried the scent of expensive wine and freshly polished mahogany, but beneath the luxury, it felt stifling. My mother's perfume clung too strongly to the fabric of my shirt as she greeted me with a delicate kiss on the cheek. My father gave a curt nod from across the room, his fingers tapping idly against his glass. Sophia, my perfect older sister, stood near the grand fireplace, her expression unreadable. "Ethan, dear, you made it," my mother said, smoothing an invisible crease in my jacket. I had driven nearly an hour to be here, my stomach twisting the entire ride. I wanted to believe that tonight was about me, that they had remembered. "I wouldn't miss it," I said, forcing a smile. The dining table stretched out in front of us, set with silverware so polished it reflected the chandelier's golden glow. A small part of me had expected at least a birthday cake waiting at the center. Instead, there was an unopened bottle of champagne and a neatly stacked pile of congratulatory cards, none of which were addressed to me. Sophia caught my gaze and smirked. "I got the job," she announced, breaking the silence. My father lifted his glass immediately, his expression warming in a way it never did for me. "To Sophia's success," he said, his voice full of approval. My mother beamed, placing a hand on my sister's arm as if she were the prize of the evening. "Top financial firm," she added, glancing at me, her voice laced with something close to pity. "We always knew she'd do great things." I let out a short breath and pulled out my chair. My name had yet to be spoken. I sat stiffly, my mind racing. This wasn't a mistake. They hadn't forgotten my birthday. They had simply chosen to celebrate something else. I cleared my throat, trying to suppress the bitterness rising inside me. "I got an email today," I said, keeping my voice even. "A publishing house is interested in my manuscript." For a brief second, I allowed myself to believe they would care. That maybe, just maybe, my father would finally look at me the way he looked at my sister. Silence. Then my mother gave a small smile, reaching for the wine bottle. "That's nice, dear," she said dismissively. "But have you considered a real career?" I tightened my grip on my napkin. Richard Monroe, my father, let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. "Writing doesn't pay the bills, son," he said. "You should be more like Sophia." Sophia, who had spent her entire life excelling at everything, leaned forward slightly, amusement flickering in her gaze. "I hate to say it, Ethan, but Dad's right," she said. "You can't just keep chasing dreams forever." I forced a small laugh, though my chest felt heavy. "Right," I said. "Dreams. What a ridiculous thing to have." The words tasted bitter. My father took a sip of his wine, completely unmoved. "Speaking of practical matters," I said, my voice steady, "I wanted to ask about my trust fund." For the first time that evening, the air shifted. My mother's smile faltered, and my father placed his glass down with measured precision. I knew they had hoped I wouldn't ask. The fund had been set up by my grandfather before he passed. It was supposed to be available to me on my 24th birthday, which was today. Richard leaned back in his chair, eyes cold. "It was used for family investments," he said simply. I blinked. "Excuse me?" My mother sighed, placing her napkin neatly on the table. "You weren't going to do anything responsible with it, Ethan," she said. "Your father made the right decision." My stomach tightened. "That money wasn't yours to take." Sophia rolled her eyes, reaching for her wine. "You're overreacting," she said. "Dad made a smart move. The investments benefited all of us." I let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "Really? Because I don't see any of those benefits coming my way." Richard exhaled through his nose, his patience wearing thin. "You have a roof over your head," he said. "You should be grateful." Something in me snapped. I pushed my chair back, standing abruptly. "I see," I said, my voice eerily calm. "So that's how it is." "Sit down," my father ordered, his tone sharp. I didn't. I had spent my entire life being compared to Sophia, made to feel like less. Tonight was supposed to be mine. But instead, I had been reduced to nothing more than a footnote in their evening. "I came here thinking we'd have dinner as a family," I said, but clearly I was mistaken. "Ethan, don't be dramatic," my mother said. I let out a breath, nodding slowly. "Right, dramatic." I turned and walked toward the door, my heart pounding. Behind me, my father's voice rang out one last time. You're acting childish, Ethan. This family has always given you everything. I stopped but didn't turn around. No, I said, my voice steady. You've only ever given me reasons to leave. And with that, I stepped out into the night, the cold air biting at my skin. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. A message from Marilyn, my grandmother. Meet me first thing in the morning. There are things you need to know. I stared at the words, my heart still racing. Whatever it was, I had a feeling it would change everything. The air smelled of expensive wine and freshly arranged flowers. But there was something else beneath it. A sickening weight pressed against my chest as I stepped inside the Monroe estate, my fingers tightening around the small gift bag I had brought for myself. The foyer was decorated with shimmering gold and white banners. Clusters of balloons lined the grand staircase. My eyes landed on the massive cake at the center of the dining hall, its elegant script glowing under the chandelier. Congratulations, Sophia! I stood frozen. My birthday. My 24th birthday. I had expected something small. A quiet dinner, maybe a cake. Just a fleeting acknowledgement that this day belonged to me. Instead, the house was filled with guests in tailored suits and designer dresses. Men clinked glasses of champagne. Women exchanged pleasantries over delicate hors d'oeuvres. Laughter echoed through the hall, but none of it was for me. My mother appeared beside me, beaming. "Oh, honey, you're here," she said, pressing a quick kiss to my cheek. "Isn't this wonderful?" I turned to face her, my throat tightening. "I assume this is for me?" I said, keeping my voice even. She blinked, her expression shifting only slightly before she let out a light laugh. "Birthdays come every year, dear," she said, smoothing her dress. "But your sister just landed the opportunity of a lifetime." I felt my stomach drop. Richard Monroe, my father, raised his glass high above the crowd. His voice rang out, full of authority. "To Sophia!" he declared. "The real pride of the Monroe family." The room erupted into applause. My grip on the gift bag tightened until the paper crumpled in my palm. I had spent years convincing myself that their favoritism was subtle, that maybe I was imagining things. But tonight, there was no mistaking it. I wasn't a thought. I wasn't even a consideration. Sophia finally noticed me, her lips curling into a slow, knowing smirk. She stepped forward, draped in a deep red gown that only added to the spectacle of her success. "Oh, Ethan," she said, tilting her head. "You actually came. I thought you'd be too busy playing starving artist." The words were laced with mockery, her eyes glinting with amusement. I swallowed the sharp retort burning in my throat and forced a thin smile. "You know, I had plans," I said, voice clipped. "But I figured I'd come see what the Monroes are celebrating tonight. Apparently, not me." Sophia let out a dramatic sigh, placing a hand on my arm as if she were trying to console a lost child. "Ethan, don't be ridiculous," she said. "You're part of the family. Of course, you're welcome." I let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "Right," I said. "Welcome, like a guest at someone else's event." My father finally turned to acknowledge me. His gaze, sharp as ever, scanned me like I was an afterthought. "You should be happy for your sister," he said. "She worked for this. You could learn a thing or two about ambition." My chest burned, but I held my ground. "Right," I said. "Ambition. Is that what you call draining my trust fund?" The conversation around us hushed. Eyes turned toward me, the clinking of glasses pausing mid-toast. My father's expression darkened. Catherine Monroe, my mother, cleared her throat, stepping between us. "This isn't the time," she said smoothly, her voice dripping with warning. "No, I think it is," I said. "Because I'm curious, Dad. Was my trust fund used to finance this party? Or was it already spent on Sophia's future?" Sophia rolled her eyes, swirling her wine. "God, Ethan," she muttered. "Do you always have to make everything about you?" I turned toward her, my pulse hammering in my ears. "It is about me," I said, voice steady. At least it should be. But instead of celebrating my birthday, I walk into this circus. Richard took a slow sip of his drink, setting the glass down with deliberate ease. This family has always given you everything, he said. Perhaps it's time you learn to appreciate that. A bitter laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. Everything? I repeated. Like being overlooked? Dismissed? Compared to Sophia at every turn? Sophia exhaled dramatically, setting her glass down. Honestly, Ethan, she said, you're acting pathetic. It's no wonder you never amounted to anything. The words hit me harder than I wanted to admit. I took a slow breath, then stepped back, shaking my head. I see, I said. This is who you are, who you've always been. No one stopped me as I turned toward the door. The cold night air hit me like a wave as I stepped outside. I could still hear the laughter from inside, the clinking of glasses, the celebration continuing without me. My fingers dug into my palms as I walked toward my car. As I reached for the door handle, I heard Sophia's voice behind me, sharp and taunting. You'll never be more than a failure, Ethan. I stopped. For a moment, I almost turned back, almost let the anger consume me. But then I exhaled and got into my car. I didn't belong there. Not anymore. My phone buzzed. A message from Marilyn. Meet me first thing in the morning. There are things you need to know. I stared at the screen, gripping the wheel. Whatever it was, it had to be important. The Bayou Bean was nearly empty at this hour, save for a few late-night regulars hunched over their steaming cups. The scent of roasted coffee beans filled the air, blending with the faint hum of a jazz tune playing in the background. I took a seat by the window, my fingers tapping absently against the worn wooden table. My mind was still reeling from earlier, the cheers, the toasts, the way my name had barely been uttered all evening. And then, Sophia's parting words, cutting through me like a blade. You'll never be more than a failure, Ethan. I let out a slow breath, pushing the memory aside. Right now, there was something more pressing. Marilyn Monroe, my grandmother, had asked me to meet her here, and she never called unless it was important. I spotted her the moment she walked in. Even in her 70s, she carried herself with quiet authority, dressed in a dark blue coat that contrasted against her silver hair. She made her way to the table with measured steps before settling into the chair across from me. Thank you for coming, she said, her voice calm but firm. I studied her for a moment. She had always been the only member of the family who didn't treat me like an afterthought. But she also never interfered in family matters, choosing instead to observe from a distance. Of course, I said. You sounded urgent. She nodded, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic of her coffee cup. There's something you need to know about your trust fund, she said. My stomach tightened. So it wasn't just used for something better? I asked, bitterness creeping into my voice. Her expression darkened. No, Ethan, she said. It wasn't. I leaned in, my pulse quickening. My father did something, didn't he? A slow nod. He didn't just reallocate it, she said. He transferred it into an offshore account. I stared at her, the weight of her words pressing down on me. An offshore account, I repeated, barely able to process it. But before I could speak again, she added something that made my entire body go rigid. And he didn't do it alone. I blinked. What do you mean? She exhaled, setting her cup down with a quiet clink. Ethan, she said carefully. It wasn't just your father. Your mother orchestrated the entire scheme. The words landed like a blow. I shook my head, gripping the edge of the table. No, I said. She wouldn't. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Catherine Monroe had always played the role of the elegant, devoted wife. The one who smoothed things over when my father was too harsh, who reassured us that everything was fine. But beneath that perfect facade, there had always been something calculating. She wasn't just complicit. She was the mastermind. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Of course, I muttered. Why am I even surprised? Marilyn reached into her bag, pulling out an old, slightly worn envelope. "Your grandfather knew Richard couldn't be trusted," she said, sliding it across the table. "That's why he left a backup plan, for you." I hesitated before taking it, feeling the weight of it in my hands. Inside was a single key. I looked up at her, confused. "It belongs to a safety deposit box in Houston," she said. "The answers you're looking for are inside." The cafe suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. I clenched the envelope in my hand, my heart beat loud in my ears. Whatever was inside that box, it was only the beginning. The First Texas Bank loomed ahead, its glass doors reflecting the bright morning sun. I tightened my grip on the key Marilyn had given me, my pulse steady but insistent. A part of me wanted to believe that whatever was inside this box wouldn't change anything, that I was only here to confirm what I already knew. But deep down, I understood. Once I stepped through those doors, there was no turning back. I took a breath and entered. The bank was quiet, save for the muffled sounds of keyboards clicking and low murmurs between tellers and customers. A woman in a crisp blazer greeted me at the front desk, offering a polite but rehearsed smile. "How can I assist you today?" I slid the key across the counter, my other hand fishing my ID from my wallet. "I have a safety deposit box to access," I said, keeping my tone even. She examined the key, nodded, then gestured toward a small hallway. "Right this way, Mr. Monroe." She led me past a row of private viewing rooms before stopping at a heavy steel door. A security guard entered a code, unlocking it with a quiet beep. The woman stepped inside and pointed toward a row of identical boxes built into the wall. "Box 319, she said, motioning for me to follow. I watched as she inserted the key, turning it with a metallic click before sliding the box from its compartment. "I'll give you some privacy," she said, stepping out and closing the door behind her. Silence settled around me. I stared at the box for a long moment before finally reaching for it. My hands were steady as I lifted the lid, but the second I saw what was inside, my breath caught. Stacks of old documents, a thick ledger, several legal papers, yellowed with time. I pulled out the ledger first, flipping it open to the first page. My grandfather's handwriting greeted me, neat, precise, methodical. The first few entries seemed ordinary, listing routine transactions. But as I turned the pages, something shifted. The numbers grew larger. The destinations became vague. Hundreds of thousands of dollars funneled into private accounts, many under names I didn't recognize. I scanned further, my stomach twisting as I landed on a familiar one. Sophia Monroe. My sister's name was listed beside a series of transfers, large sums moving from what should have been my trust fund into separate holdings. My fingers tightened around the pages as I flipped further. This wasn't just about her. It was bigger. Then I saw it. A birth certificate. I stared at the name printed on the paper, my blood running cold. Liam Prescott. I blinked, my mind scrambling for something, anything to explain this. I had never heard that name before. Why was it here? Why was it in a box meant for me? I reached for another document beneath it. A legal contract signed years ago. My eyes scanned the text. My heart beat loud in my ears. Richard Monroe, my father, was listed as a benefactor. The document outlined financial support, educational expenses, healthcare provisions. My breath came sharp and uneven. Liam Prescott wasn't just some random name. He was Richard Monroe's son. My father had been supporting another child in secret for years, and he had used my trust fund to do it. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I closed the file, gripping the edges tightly as I tried to steady myself. My entire life, I had played second to Sophia, believing she was the only one they had chosen over me. But I had never even been second. I had been third. I forced myself to take a slow breath, then reached into the box again, searching for anything else that could explain this. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, expecting another call from Marilyn. But it wasn't her. It was a number I didn't recognize. One simple message stared back at me. "You should have left it alone." A cold shiver crawled down my spine. I turned my head slightly, my gaze shifting toward the security cameras in the corner of the room. My reflection stared back at me in the polished steel walls. Someone was watching. I shut the box and stood, sliding the documents into my bag before exiting the room. The hallway suddenly felt longer, the air heavier. As I stepped into the main lobby, my pulse quickened. I wasn't just uncovering financial fraud anymore. I had stepped into something much more dangerous. The cold wind cut through my jacket as I stepped out of the bank. My hands tightened around the folder, the weight of what I had just uncovered pressing down on me like a lead block. Liam Prescott. A name I had never heard before today, yet somehow he had been receiving financial support from my father. Money that had been meant for me. I forced my legs to move, barely aware of my surroundings as I reached my car. My thoughts raced, colliding with one another in an endless loop. Did Sophia know? Had she been part of this? Only one way to find out. The drive to Sophia's law firm felt shorter than usual, though that could have been the adrenaline fueling me. I didn't bother parking properly. My tires screeched against the pavement as I pulled into the first open space, yanking my keys out of the ignition. I slammed the door shut behind me and strode into the building, pushing past the receptionist's attempt to stop me. "Mr. Monroe, you can't just—" "Watch me," I snapped, ignoring the protests as I stormed toward my sister's office. I threw the door open without knocking. Sophia barely looked up from her desk, only arching a perfectly shaped eyebrow as she finished signing something. "No offense, Ethan, but you look like hell," she said, setting her pen down. I tossed the birth certificate onto her desk. The paper slid across the polished wood, coming to a stop inches from her fingers. "Who the hell is Liam Prescott?" I demanded. For the first time that night, Sophia hesitated. She reached for the document, her eyes scanning it carefully. A frown tugged at the corners of her lips. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice level. "So you did know," I accused, ignoring her question. She sighed, rubbing her temples before leaning back in her chair. "I suspected," she admitted, "but I didn't have proof." I clenched my fists, barely holding back the frustration bubbling inside me. "That's not good enough," I said. "You knew Dad was hiding something, and you didn't say a word?" Her jaw tightened. "Because knowing something and being able to prove it are two different things, Ethan." I shook my head, pacing the room. "You're telling me you saw discrepancies in Dad's finances and just let it slide?" "I did my own digging," she said. "Years ago, I found transactions that didn't add up, accounts that shouldn't have existed. But every time I got close, things conveniently disappeared." I stopped pacing, staring at her. "You think he covered his tracks?" She met my gaze, her expression unreadable. "Ethan," she said carefully, "our father isn't just corrupt, he's dangerous." A chill ran through me. "You're saying if he finds out I'm looking into this—" "He won't just cut you off," she said, voice low. "He'll destroy you." I let out a breath, my heartbeat drumming in my ears. "You should have told me," I said. "Years ago." Sophia sighed again, standing up. She crossed the room, stopping inches away from me. "You really think I had a choice?" she asked. "You think if I had come to you with nothing but suspicions, Dad wouldn't have found out?" I stayed silent. "You have no idea what he's capable of," she added. I took a step back, shaking my head. "I don't care what he's capable of," I said. "I'm not letting this go." Sophia studied me for a long moment before finally nodding. "Then you better be careful," she said, "because if you're not—" I didn't let her finish. I turned and walked out. As I stepped into the elevator, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, frowning at the unknown number flashing on the screen. I hesitated before answering. "Who is this?" I asked. A deep voice, unfamiliar and calm, responded. "Walk away, Ethan," the man said, "or you'll regret it." The line went dead. I stared at the screen, gripping the phone tightly. I was officially being threatened. The neon sign flickered above the entrance of the Ironwood, casting a dim glow over the cracked pavement. The bar sat on the outskirts of Houston, wedged between a rundown motel and a pawn shop that advertised "No I'd, no problem" in bold, peeling letters. It wasn't the kind of place I imagined someone like Liam Prescott would frequent, but according to Maddie's research, he came here often. I hesitated at the door, my fingers tightening around my phone. The unknown caller's warning from earlier still rang in my head, but if they thought a vague threat would scare me off, they didn't know me at all. I pushed the door open. The inside was exactly what I expected. Low lighting, the smell of stale beer and old wood, a jukebox in the corner humming an old country song. A handful of patrons lingered at the bar, nursing their drinks in silence. I scanned the room, looking for the man whose name had turned my life upside down. Then I saw him. Liam Prescott sat in a booth near the back, dressed in a sharp navy suit that felt out of place in a dive like this. He exuded confidence, his posture relaxed, one hand resting on a glass of whiskey, while the other tapped lazily against the table. He knew I was here. His gaze met mine before I even made it halfway across the room, a smirk curling at the edges of his lips. I slid into the booth across from him, keeping my expression neutral. "You know who I am," I said. He leaned back, amusement flickering in his dark eyes. "Ethan Monroe," he said, as if tasting the name. "The disposable son." I clenched my jaw, ignoring the jab. "My father funneled my trust fund into your account," I said, my voice steady. "Why?" Liam swirled his whiskey before taking a slow sip. "Because I gave him no choice," he said. I narrowed my eyes. "What does that mean?" He exhaled, setting his glass down. "Let me guess," he said. "You thought your dad was just some rich asshole who played favorites, right?" I didn't answer. Liam chuckled. "Yeah, that's what I thought too." I leaned forward, my patience thinning. "Cut the theatrics," I said. "Tell me why my father's been paying you off for years." His smirk faded slightly. "Because I exist," he said simply. My fingers curled into my palm. "That's not an answer." He studied me for a moment before reaching into the pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a thin silver money clip and set it on the table. The initials R.M. were engraved into the metal. "He gave this to me when I turned 18, Liam said. "Told me to take the money and keep my mouth shut. Said he had a real family to protect." The words hit harder than I expected. Liam wasn't just some forgotten mistake. He was a secret my father had been paying to keep buried. I swallowed the anger bubbling in my chest. "So why now?" I asked. "Why stop the payments?" Liam's expression darkened. "That's what I've been trying to figure out," he said. "The last transfer was months ago. Then nothing. No warning, no explanation." A cold realization settled in my gut. "You think he's preparing to disappear?" I said. Liam's silence was all the confirmation I needed. He tossed back the rest of his whiskey before setting the empty glass down with a quiet clink. "So, little brother," he said, smirking again, "what are we going to do about it?" I didn't flinch at the word brother, because whether I liked it or not, I needed answers. And for the first time in my life, I might need to work with the last person I expected. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and old grease. A jukebox hummed softly in the background, playing a tune that no one was really listening to. Outside, rain drizzled against the window, streaking the glass with thin lines of water. I sat across from Liam in a booth tucked away in the corner. It wasn't my choice of location. He'd insisted on somewhere quiet, somewhere no one would pay attention to two men talking about taking down their father. He stirred his coffee lazily, his smirk never quite leaving his face. "You hate our father," he said. "I hate our father. Seems like we already have something in common." I crossed my arms, my back pressing against the cracked leather of the seat. "That doesn't mean I trust you." His smirk widened. "You don't have to," he said, leaning forward. "But if we want to take him down, we need to move fast." I studied him. He was too comfortable, too sure of himself. It was unsettling. "Why are you so eager to help?" I asked. He took a slow sip of his coffee before answering. "Because I'm running out of time," he said simply. I frowned. What does that mean? Liam reached into his jacket, pulling out a folded piece of paper. He slid it across the table, tapping it with 2 fingers. I unfolded it, scanning the numbers and account names scribbled in neat, deliberate handwriting. What am I looking at? I asked. Offshore accounts, he said. All tied to Richard Monroe? I glanced up at him. You've been tracking his finances? He shrugged. For years, and one of those accounts was emptied last week. I looked back down at the paper, my pulse quickening. He's moving money, I muttered. Liam nodded grimly. That means he's getting ready to vanish. I let out a slow breath, gripping the edge of the table. So what now? I asked. Liam leaned back, watching me carefully. That depends on you, little brother. I ignored the way the words sat uneasily in my chest. You want my help? Fine, I said. But I'm not doing this blind. If we do this, we do it my way. His smirk returned. Fair enough, he said. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, frowning at the message from Maddie. Your dad is meeting someone tonight at the Monroe estate. You need to see this. I felt Liam's gaze on me. What is it? He asked. I turned the screen toward him. For the first time, his expression darkened. We exchanged a look. We knew what we had to do. The Monroe estate loomed ahead, its towering facade bathed in the dim glow of the outdoor lamps. I had spent my childhood in that house, but tonight it felt foreign, like an enemy's stronghold instead of home. Liam and I crouched behind the neatly trimmed hedges, hidden in the thick shadows that stretched across the lawn. The evening air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and freshly cut grass. My pulse pounded against my ribs as I peered toward the study window, where a sliver of warm light bled through the curtains. Inside, my father was waiting. Liam nudged my shoulder. We have 5 minutes before security makes their next round, he murmured. I gave a tight nod, then crept forward, keeping low as I approached the window. Liam followed closely behind. We pressed against the cool brick wall, angling ourselves just enough to see inside. Richard Monroe sat behind his massive oak desk, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. His expression was unreadable, calm, controlled, as if nothing in the world could shake him. But there was tension in his shoulders, a stiffness in the way he held himself. Across from him sat a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, dressed in an expensive tailored suit, his posture sharp and precise. A thick folder rested on the desk between them. The man slid it forward. The documents are finalized, he said, his voice smooth but firm. Once you sign, you'll be off the radar within 72 hours. My breath caught. I turned to Liam, who was already staring at me, his jaw clenched. He really is planning to run, I whispered. Yeah, Liam muttered. And he's not planning to take anyone with him. Inside, my father exhaled, rubbing his temples before reaching for the folder. Make sure there's no trace of me left, he said. The man nodded. Everything has been arranged. Liam's grip on the windowsill tightened. His entire body radiated tension, like a coil wound too tight. Then Richard spoke again. And what about my sons? The man didn't hesitate. They won't be a problem. My stomach lurched. I forced myself to stay still, to keep my breathing even, but everything inside me screamed to burst through that window and demand answers. Liam wasn't so composed. That bastard was planning to erase us, he hissed, his voice a low growl. He started to move, but I grabbed his arm, shaking my head sharply. Not yet. Instead, I pulled out my phone, angling it just right to capture the conversation through the crack in the window. Liam glanced at me, his eyes burning with fury, but after a tense moment, he nodded. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was war. Liam's apartment was a sharp contrast to the chaos brewing in my mind. The place was modern, sleek, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Houston skyline. It was the kind of place you'd expect from someone who'd been siphoning money from the same man we were trying to take down. I paced the living room, phone in hand, replaying the video for what felt like the 100th time. The words echoed in my head. Make sure there's no trace of me left. And what about my sons? They won't be a problem. Each time I heard them, my blood ran hotter. Liam sat on the couch, swirling a glass of whiskey in one hand, as he watched the footage again on his laptop. His expression was unreadable, but the tension in his jaw gave him away. The bastard was going to disappear and leave us in the dust, he muttered. I stopped pacing, rubbing a hand over my face. We need to expose this, I said, unlocking my phone and scrolling through my contacts. If we leak it to the press— No, Liam cut in, his voice sharp. The media will turn this into a circus. You think they're gonna care about justice? No, they'll paint him as some poor billionaire forced into exile. We need something bigger. I sighed, dropping onto the armrest of the couch. Then what? We just sit on this? Liam shook his head, setting his glass down. I have someone. I looked at him. A contact, he clarified. An attorney who's been trying to nail Richard for years. That caught my attention. And you didn't mention this earlier because— Liam leaned back, resting an arm over the back of the couch. Because I wasn't sure you were serious about taking him down. I clenched my jaw, my fingers tightening around my phone. I'm serious, I said. Liam studied me for a moment, then nodded. She's been building a case on financial fraud, offshore accounts, shell companies, he continued. But this? This is proof of intent. If we get this to her, she'll know what to do. I hesitated. Giving this to a lawyer meant making it official. No turning back. No undoing what came next. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. Sophia. The message was short. I know what you're doing. We need to talk. Now Liam peered at my phone and smirked. Looks like Big Sis finally picked a side. I exhaled slowly, staring at the message. This changed things. Now I had to decide. Trust Sophia or go forward with the evidence on our own. I stepped into the towering glass building, my pulse pounding in my ears. The pristine lobby of Winslow and Carter LLP was a stark contrast to the mess unraveling inside my family. The receptionist barely looked up as I strode past, my destination already set. Sophia was waiting for me in a private conference room on the 23rd floor. The space was sleek and modern, with a long mahogany table and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the Houston skyline. She stood by the window, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. You're late, she said without turning around. I closed the door behind me. Traffic, I muttered, though we both knew it wasn't the truth. I had hesitated outside for longer than I cared to admit. Sophia finally faced me, her sharp brown eyes scanning me like a puzzle she was trying to solve. So, she said, folding her arms tighter, you're really going through with this? I didn't hesitate. He's a criminal, Sophia. You know that. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. You think this is that simple? She asked. You think we can just flip a switch and watch him fall without consequences? I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table. He stole from me, I said, voice steady. From you. From God knows how many people. He was ready to disappear and leave us all behind. If you're okay with that, fine, but I'm not. Sophia laughed, but there was no humor in it. You still don't get it, she said. If we take him down, we all go down with him. I frowned. What are you talking about? She walked to the table and pulled out a thick folder, sliding it toward me. Look inside, she said. I hesitated before flipping it open. Page after page of financial records, contracts, bank transfers. My name. Her name. Even our mother's. What the hell is this? I asked, my throat dry. Collateral damage, Sophia said. Dad didn't just funnel your trust fund into his secret accounts. He used family investments, our investments, to fund illegal dealings. Offshore accounts, shell companies, insider trading. It's all here. I stared at the documents, my stomach tightening. If this gets out, she continued, her voice softer now. "The Monroe name is finished. The entire family will be ruined." I looked up at her, anger and confusion twisting inside me. "You knew," I said slowly. Sophia met my gaze without flinching. "I suspected." I clenched my fists. "And you did nothing? What was I supposed to do?" she snapped. "Blow the whistle and take us all down? Lose everything?" I let out a breath, trying to steady myself. "You don't care about justice," I said. "You care about protecting your place in all of this." Sophia's jaw tightened. "That's where you're wrong. I'm trying to protect what's left." She slid the folder back toward me. "I can help you," she said. "But if we do this, we have to do it my way." I didn't move. Trusting Sophia meant playing by her rules, controlling the damage instead of exposing everything. But if I went forward without her, there was no telling what kind of fallout would come next. The choice was mine. The folder sat heavy in my lap, its contents spilling out across the table like a confession waiting to be read. I stared at the legal documents, the bank statements, the chain of confidential emails, each one another nail in Richard Monroe's coffin. Across from me, Sophia sat with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Outside the massive windows of her high-rise office, the Houston skyline stretched endlessly, the city moving forward as if my entire world wasn't crumbling at my feet. "This is everything," she said, her voice steady. "Proof of offshore accounts, money laundering, fraud, more than enough to put him away." I forced my fingers to unclench from the paper I was gripping. "And yet," I said, looking up at her, "you don't want to expose him." Sophia's lips pressed into a thin line. "We can't just expose him," she corrected. "We need to control the fallout." I scoffed, shaking my head. "Control the fallout? Are you hearing yourself? He's been stealing for years. He was planning to erase us." "And if we don't do this right," she said, voice calmer but firm, "he'll drag us all down with him." I pushed back from the table, pacing the length of the conference room. "So what's your solution? Let him walk?" Sophia sighed, rubbing her temples. But there's a way to make sure he falls alone." I stopped pacing. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek black phone, setting it on the table between us. "I've already made contact with the FBI," she said. My breath caught. Sophia leaned forward, her fingers tapping lightly against the phone. "A special agent is waiting to meet you, to discuss testifying." I could only stare at her. "You set this up?" I asked. She met my gaze without blinking. "I wasn't going to let you do this alone." A cold laugh escaped me. "So what? This was your plan all along? Play both sides?" "I was covering my bases," she said simply. "Unlike you, I can't afford to be reckless." I ran a hand over my face, the weight of everything crushing down on me. "The moment I step into that meeting," I said slowly, "there's no turning back." Sophia nodded. "That's why I'm giving you a choice." She slid the black phone across the table. "If you want out," she said, "walk away now. No one will ever know you were involved. But if you want to finish this, meet me tomorrow at the FBI office." I picked up the phone, feeling its weight in my palm. It wasn't just a phone, it was a lifeline, or a noose. I pushed back my chair and stood, pocketing the device. Sophia didn't say another word as I walked out of her office, my mind spinning. I was about to betray my father. The question was it the right move? The sterile walls of the FBI headquarters made my skin crawl. The place smelled like coffee, paper, and quiet authority. Like decisions were made here that could ruin lives in a matter of seconds. Mine included. I pulled the door open to the conference room where Sophia was already seated at the long, steel-gray table. Her posture was perfect, her face a mask of controlled confidence. She barely looked up as I walked in. A man in his late 40s sat across from her, a neatly pressed suit and a badge clipped to his belt. His expression was unreadable, but his sharp eyes cataloged every move I made as I took my seat. "Ethan Monroe," he said, nodding. "I'm Special Agent Carter." I nodded back, though my throat was too tight to form a proper response. Agent Carter clasped his hands together and leaned forward. "I appreciate you both coming in. Let's get right to it." He flipped open a thick file, scanning its contents before looking up. "Your father has been under investigation for months. We've been gathering evidence, but your testimony could be the final nail in his coffin." I glanced at Sophia, who was as still as stone. She had known about this, had set this up, and hadn't told me until last night. "This isn't just about stolen inheritance, is it?" I asked. Agent Carter shook his head. It's about money laundering, tax fraud, and potential international crime." A weight pressed against my chest. "He's connected to something bigger," Carter continued. "We're talking offshore accounts, shell corporations, ties to foreign investors with less than legal business practices. We have enough to move forward, but with your cooperation, we can build a stronger case." My stomach churned. I had known my father was corrupt, but hearing it laid out so plainly made it feel real in a way I wasn't ready for. "So, what exactly do you need from us?" Sophia asked, her voice steady, controlled. Carter turned his attention to her. "We need documents, records of internal meetings, correspondence between Richard and his business partners." Sophia nodded, unsurprised. "And you," Carter said, looking at me now. "We need your testimony." I clenched my fists under the table. Sophia finally looked at me. "This is our chance," she said. "We give them everything. In exchange, we protect ourselves and what's left of the company." I narrowed my eyes. "That's what this is about for you? Preserving the Monroe name?" A flicker of something, annoyance maybe, passed across her face. "It's about making sure we're not collateral damage, Ethan." I exhaled slowly, trying to gather my thoughts. I had spent my entire life feeling like I didn't belong in this family. My father had stolen my future, and now I had the chance to take his away. But Sophia wasn't here for justice. She was here to protect herself. I turned back to Carter. "If I do this, what happens next?" "We file charges," he said. "There will be a trial. And if Richard Monroe is convicted, he'll be behind bars for the rest of his life." A slow, cold realization settled over me. This was real. This wasn't just exposing my father's secrets. This was putting him away for good. Carter reached into his folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the table toward me. "If you're in, sign this," he said, and we moved forward. I stared at the paper. The words blurred together as my pulse pounded in my ears. I picked up the pen. My hand shook as I hovered over the line. Once I signed, there was no turning back. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The Monroe estate loomed in the distance, its grand pillars illuminated against the night sky. It looked exactly the same as it had for years. Cold, untouchable. But tonight, everything would change. Sophia had told me not to come here alone. She had practically begged me to let the FBI handle the final step, to wait for Richard to be taken in quietly, but I couldn't. I needed to see him one last time. I needed to look him in the eyes and make sure he understood that he had finally lost. As I pushed open the massive wooden doors, the familiar scent of oak and expensive whiskey filled my lungs. Every inch of this house screamed of power. His power. I found him in his study, where he always was. The fireplace crackled, casting an amber glow against the polished mahogany shelves. He sat in his leather chair, one leg crossed over the other, swirling a glass of whiskey in his hand. When he saw me, he smirked. "I was wondering when you'd show up," he said, his voice casual, like we were discussing the weather. I stepped forward, pulling the signed FBI agreement from my coat pocket and slamming it onto his desk. "I testified," I said, my voice steady. "You're done." Richard glanced at the paper without picking it up. He took a slow sip of his drink and then let out a quiet chuckle. "You think you can destroy me?" His amusement was almost chilling. You think the FBI is enough? I felt my jaw tighten. This isn't just about money anymore. It's about everything you've stolen from me. My future, my trust, my dignity. Richard finally set his glass down, leaning forward, his piercing gaze locking onto mine. Tell me, Ethan, do you feel powerful now? Do you feel like you've won? I didn't answer. He exhaled through his nose, shaking his head in disappointment. You always were the sentimental one, he mused. And look where it got you. My stomach churned, but I didn't waver. I know about Liam, I said. His smirk returned. Of course you do. And I know about the offshore accounts, about the shell corporations. Richard leaned back, lacing his fingers together. And? You're not going anywhere, I said. You think you can run, but you won't get far. That made him laugh. A deep, genuine laugh, as if I had just told the most amusing joke he'd ever heard. Oh, Ethan, he sighed, standing up slowly. You still don't understand, do you? He walked around the desk, stopping just inches from me. He was taller, broader, more imposing than I'd ever remember him being. I knew, he said quietly. I knew what you and Sophia were planning. I knew about the meeting with the FBI, about the so-called testimony you thought would seal my fate. My heart pounded. Richard smirked, lowering his voice. You're predictable, son. And because of that, I made my own arrangements. A sinking feeling washed over me. You think I'd sit back and let my own children betray me? He whispered. I've had an exit plan for years, and if you think a few signatures on a legal document will stop me, then you're a bigger fool than I thought. The air between us was thick with unspoken threats. You want to stop me? Richard said, his smirk never faltering. Do it. Otherwise, step aside. I didn't move. His fingers twitched like he was ready to push past me. Then, in the distance, I heard them. The wailing of sirens. Richard froze. The color drained from his face as the sound grew louder, closer. The flashing red and blue lights painted the walls of his study. You called them, he whispered, his voice no longer mocking. I met his gaze. I told you, I said. You're done. For the first time, Richard Monroe looked afraid. The sound of sirens shattered the stillness of the estate. Red and blue lights flashed against the massive glass windows, casting eerie shadows across the grand foyer. I stood frozen, my breath shallow, as the front doors burst open. Federal agents flooded inside, their voices sharp and commanding. FBI! Richard Monroe, step away from the desk with your hands where we can see them. Richard turned toward the entrance, his jaw clenched, his fingers twitching slightly. For a moment, it was as if he were calculating, assessing if there was still a way out. But there wasn't. The lead agent moved forward, his gun holstered, but his presence unwavering. Richard Monroe, you are under arrest for financial fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. Richard didn't flinch. His expression was unreadable, his grip tightening around the edge of his desk. Then, from behind the agents, another figure stepped forward. Sophia. She was dressed sharply as always, her heels clicking against the marble floor, but her face was unreadable. She didn't even spare me a glance. Her gaze was locked on Richard. His mouth twitched into something that could have been a smirk if the situation weren't so dire. So my own daughter turns on me, he murmured. Sophia didn't blink. It's over, Dad. For the first time in my life, I saw something flicker in Richard Monroe's expression. Not anger, not arrogance, something almost hollow. But it was gone in an instant. Two agents stepped in and pulled his arms behind his back, locking the handcuffs in place. The metallic click echoed through the room. Richard Monroe, you have the right to remain silent. As the agent recited his rights, Richard turned his eyes to me. You ungrateful little— Enough! Sophia interrupted. her voice cutting through the air like a knife. Richard clenched his jaw, nostrils flaring. I held his gaze, refusing to look away. You stole my future, I said, my voice low, steady. And now you've lost yours. The agents pulled him toward the door. But as they reached the threshold, another figure stepped into the light. Catherine Monroe. She had been standing in the shadows, her face pale, her hands trembling. Her eyes darted between Richard, Sophia, and me, filled with something close to horror. As Richard was led past her, he didn't even glance in her direction. Her lips parted, her breath shaky. Then she turned to us. You've destroyed this family, she whispered. Her words hit harder than I expected. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing myself to keep my voice steady. No, Mom, I said. We saved it from him. She shook her head slowly, her expression unreadable. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. Sophia exhaled sharply beside me, running a hand through her hair. It's done, she murmured. I nodded, but a weight still pressed down on my chest. The news vans had already begun to gather outside. By morning, the world would know that Richard Monroe, one of the most powerful corporate figures in the country, had fallen. I stepped outside, the night air crisp against my skin. The reporters hadn't swarmed yet, but it was only a matter of time. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. A strange chill ran down my spine. I hesitated, then answered. Hello? Silence. Then a voice, low and familiar. You think this is over, Ethan? I stiffened. You have no idea what's coming next. The call ended. I pulled the phone away, my heart hammering in my chest. The screen flashed with the caller ID, Liam Prescott. I clenched my jaw, staring at the name. Richard Monroe was gone. But this fight wasn't over. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries filled the small cafe. Outside, the streets of downtown were alive with the usual mid-morning bustle, cars honking, pedestrians weaving through the sidewalks, the occasional hum of a passing train in the distance. I stepped inside, scanning the room. Liam was already there, sitting in a corner booth, one arm draped lazily over the back of his chair, a smirk playing at his lips. Of course, he was smiling. I made my way over, sliding into the seat across from him. Well, well, he drawled, stirring his coffee with deliberate slowness. Look who finally decided to face me. I ignored the smugness in his voice. You wanted to talk, so talk. Liam leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His tailored suit was perfectly pressed, not a hair out of place. He looked like a man who had already won whatever game he was playing. I have to admit, he said, voice laced with amusement. I didn't think you had it in you. Taking down the old man, working with the feds. Pretty bold move. I didn't respond. Liam's smirk widened. You really did it, huh? Sent him off in handcuffs like some common criminal. Must have felt good. I exhaled slowly, refusing to let him get under my skin. You didn't drag me here just to relive the past, Liam. What do you want? He chuckled, shaking his head. Straight to the point. I respect that. He took a sip of his coffee before setting it down with a soft clink. Here's the thing, baby brother. While you were busy playing hero, I was doing my own digging. And let's just say, I found some very interesting things. I narrowed my eyes. Cut the games. Liam pulled out his phone, tapping the screen a few times before sliding it across the table. On the screen was a folder labeled Monroe Files Classified. Inside this, Liam said, are documents that would absolutely destroy what's left of your precious family name. Deals Richard made years ago, secret transactions, evidence that even the FBI didn't get their hands on. I clenched my jaw. He leaned back, watching me carefully. You see, Ethan, I never cared about the money. I never cared about the company. What I care about is making sure everyone knows exactly who Richard Monroe was. His eyes darkened. And if that means watching everything he built burn to the ground, then so be it. I let his words hang between us, studying his expression. That's what you want? I asked. To destroy everything just because you can? Liam shrugged. Call it justice, call it revenge. Hell, call it entertainment. Doesn't matter to me. I exhaled through my nose, choosing my words carefully. You and I both know that our father is gone. This, I gestured toward the phone. This doesn't bring back what he stole from us. It doesn't change what he did. Liam tapped his fingers against the table. And yet, here you are, trying to stop me. I shook my head. I'm not stopping you. I'm giving you a choice. Liam arched an eyebrow. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. If you want to be like him, if you want to let anger and bitterness define you, then go ahead. But I'm done living in his shadow. Liam's smirk faltered for just a fraction of a second. I pushed back my chair and stood up. For the first time in my life, I felt light. Free. I didn't need to fight anymore. Liam watched me with an unreadable expression as I turned to leave. See you around, baby brother, he called after me. I didn't look back. The terminal was alive with the usual symphony of travel. Announcements crackled over the intercom. The rhythmic beeping of boarding passes being scanned echoed through the space, and the occasional roll of luggage wheels hummed against the polished floors. I stood near the departure gate, a one-way ticket clenched in my hand. Houston was behind me. And soon, it would stay that way. Just another chapter in a book I was finally closing. Are you sure about this? I turned to see Sophia standing there, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. I am, I said simply. She let out a quiet breath and reached into her bag, pulling out a white envelope. This is for you. I frowned, hesitating before taking it. What is it? It's not much, she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. But it's a start. I turned the envelope over in my hands, debating whether or not to open it now. I thought you wanted to rebuild the Monroe name, I said carefully. I do. She gave a small, tired smile. But that doesn't mean you have to stay and suffer for it. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Sophia had always been the one who embraced the Monroe legacy. She had fought to keep it intact, even when it threatened to swallow us whole. But now, standing here, she was finally letting me go. Thank you, I said, voice quieter than I intended. She nodded once, her gaze softening. You'll be okay, she murmured. I wasn't sure if she meant it for me or herself. A voice over the loudspeaker called for final boarding. Sophia stepped back, stuffing her hands into the pockets of her coat. Well, she said with forced lightness, I guess this is it. I nodded, gripping the envelope a little tighter. Then, for the first time in years, I pulled her into a quick embrace. She stiffened at first, caught off guard, but then her arms came around me. It was brief, awkward, but it was real. When I pulled away, I gave her one last look. Take care of yourself, Sophia. You too, little brother. With that, I turned and headed toward the gate. As I walked down the jet bridge, I finally opened the envelope. Inside, along with a check, was a folded piece of paper. The handwriting was old, slightly faded. A letter. From grandfather. I unfolded it, scanning the words. Ethan, if you're reading this, it means you've come to a crossroads. The Monroe name is just that. A name. It holds no power over you unless you allow it to. Family is not about money. It's not about legacy. It's about the choices we make. Choose wisely and remember, you are not bound by where you came from. You are free to become whoever you wish to be. My throat tightened as I folded the letter back into the envelope. I boarded the plane, sliding into my seat. The city stretched out beneath me as the aircraft began to taxi toward the runway. Skyscrapers and highways, all the places I once thought I could never leave behind, now looked so small. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, glancing at the screen. A message from Liam. Good luck, little brother. You're gonna need it. I exhaled a small laugh, shaking my head. Then, without a second thought, I powered off my phone and slipped it into my bag. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking back. There comes a moment in life when you realize you are not bound by where you came from. You are not defined by your past, your family's mistakes, or the expectations placed upon you. You are free to choose, free to walk away from what no longer serves you. For me, that moment was standing at the departure gate, letting go of the weight I had carried for so long. And in that choice, I found strength. Strength to start over, to build something new, not from obligation, but from purpose. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: you are not your past. You are the choices you make today. So choose yourself. Choose growth. And if this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt the need to break free and redefine your path, I invite you to join me. Subscribe, and let's continue this journey together. Hey there, I'm Kala, and this is the story of how my own family betrayed me. My parents set up a trust fund just for my brother, while I was the one paying their bills, while I was the one keeping them afloat, making sacrifices, and putting my own life on hold. And when I found out, they told me I didn't need it, because I was independent. But that was just the beginning. The lies ran deeper than I ever imagined. My own family drained my inheritance, stole from me, and when I fought back, they tried to destroy me. They sabotaged my job, locked me out of my own finances, and even turned the world against me with their lies. I spent my whole life trying to earn their love. But what if I was never meant to have it? What if I was only ever meant to be their safety net, their personal ATM? The smell of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air as I stepped into my parents' home, the familiar creak of the wooden floor beneath my feet. It had been months since my last visit, and yet everything looked exactly the same. The framed family photos lining the hallway, the antique clock ticking steadily in the living room, unchanging, like time had stood still in this house. Kala, sweetheart, you finally made it. My mother's voice floated from the kitchen, warm yet laced with something I couldn't quite place. I set my overnight bag near the stairs before making my way toward her. She was stirring a pot of soup, her delicate fingers moving methodically. "You've been so busy. We were starting to think you'd forgotten about us," she said with a soft smile, but her eyes flickered with something else, something more expectant. "I've just had a lot going on with work," I replied, knowing full well that wasn't the answer she wanted. She wasn't interested in my deadlines, my stress, or my exhaustion. What she really wanted was to remind me that family should come first. My father sat at the kitchen table, flipping through a pile of documents, barely looking up as I walked in. He grunted a half-hearted greeting, his focus elsewhere. That had always been our dynamic. My mother fretted over me, and my father treated my presence as a mild convenience. "You're just in time," she said. "Dinner will be ready soon. Why don't you go say hi to your father?" I forced a smile and crossed the room, sitting across from him. His glasses slid down his nose as he skimmed through paperwork, occasionally muttering to himself. "Need some help?" I offered, reaching for a few of the loose papers. He exhaled sharply, as if I had disturbed something sacred, but after a pause, he handed me a folder. "Just sort these out." Separate anything labeled financials. It was nothing new. For years, I had been the responsible one, the daughter who helped manage their bills, fixed things around the house, sent money when they needed it. I had never asked for anything in return. As I sorted through the papers, my fingers brushed against a folder labeled Trust Fund, Silas Whitmore. I froze. Frowning, I pulled it out and flipped it open. The first page was a legal document outlining the terms of a trust fund. My brother's name was on every page. A trust fund. For Silas. I scanned the details. $750,000. Secured for him. Untouchable by anyone else. My name wasn't mentioned, not once. The air in the room seemed to thicken, my heartbeat roaring in my ears. "What's this?" My voice came out quieter than I expected. My father barely glanced up. "Put that back, Kala." "That's none of your concern." "None of my concern?" I repeated, gripping the folder tighter. "There's a $750,000 trust fund in Silas's name, And I wasn't even supposed to know? His jaw tensed. It's not what you think. My mother, who had been setting the table, suddenly stilled. She turned toward us, her expression carefully neutral. Calla, sweetheart, let's not make a big deal out of this. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Not a big deal? You set up a trust fund for Silas, but nothing for me? Mother sighed, placing a gentle hand on my arm as if that would soften the blow. You don't need it. You're successful, independent. Silas, he struggles. I stared at her, feeling something inside me crack. I worked for everything I have. I've been the one keeping this family afloat, and yet, somehow, I'm the one who doesn't deserve security? My father rubbed his temple, clearly irritated. This isn't about fairness, Calla. It's about what's best for the family. Best for the family? The words tasted bitter in my mouth. So, what am I then? Just a backup plan? A paycheck you can call when you need something? Neither of them answered. And in that silence, the truth settled deep into my bones. It had never mattered how much I sacrificed, how many times I had put them first. I had always been the afterthought. I placed the folder on the table, exhaling slowly. I get it now, I said, my voice eerily calm. You made your choice. And now, I'm making mine. I turned on my heel, my mother calling after me, but I didn't stop. Calla, wait. Please, we can talk about this. I grabbed my bag from the stairs and yanked open the front door. You always said family comes first, I said without looking back. But it turns out I was never part of that family to begin with. And then I walked out, slamming the door behind me. The night air was cold against my skin as I got into my car. My hands gripped the wheel tightly, my breath coming out in uneven bursts. They had made their decision. Now it was time for me to make mine. I ignored my parents' calls for the first time in my life, but I knew this was only the beginning. By the time I reached my apartment, exhaustion had settled into my bones. I tossed my bag onto the couch and exhaled, rubbing my temples as I kicked off my shoes. The silence of my home was both a relief and a heavy reminder of the battle I had just walked away from. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't need to check to know who it was. Still, curiosity won, and I pulled it out. 20 missed calls, 15 from my mother, 5 from my father. The messages weren't much better. Mom. Calla, let's talk. Dad. You're being unreasonable. Come back so we can discuss this like adults. Mom. You're overreacting. You don't understand everything. Dad. Silas needs this. You don't. I clenched my jaw, flipping my phone screen down on the counter. Of course, they would spin it this way. Of course, they would treat my feelings as an overreaction rather than the years of built-up resentment they had carefully ignored. I had been walking on eggshells around them for so long, doing whatever was necessary to keep the peace. And now, the moment I chose myself over their demands, they were scrambling to regain control. For the first time in my life, I didn't respond. I let their calls ring. I let their texts sit unanswered. I knew it wouldn't be that easy, but for tonight, I just needed space to breathe. Morning came too soon, and with it, the gnawing weight of reality. At work, I tried to focus, but my thoughts drifted back to my phone, which had been vibrating off and on all morning. During my lunch break, I finally gave in. Another string of messages waited for me. Mom. I don't understand why you're doing this to us. Dad. We're your parents. We did everything for you. Mom. Calla, please. Don't let your anger ruin this family. I gritted my teeth. They weren't apologizing. They weren't acknowledging what they had done. Instead, they were making me the problem, turning my sacrifices into expectations, twisting the narrative so I looked like the ungrateful one. I typed out a response. I gave you everything. And it was never enough. Then I deleted it. They wouldn't listen. They never had. Shoving my phone into my desk drawer, I swallowed the lump in my throat and turned my attention back to my computer. If I let them get to me now, they'd win. That evening, Jordan called. So, how long before they show up at your doorstep? I groaned, pressing the speaker button as I curled up on my couch. Don't even joke about that. I'm not joking, she said, her voice serious. You know them, Calla. They're not going to stop. I ran a hand through my hair. I don't know what to do. I don't want to cut them off completely, but you have to, she interrupted. At least for now. You can't let them keep pulling you back in. Silence stretched between us, and then she sighed. If they really loved you, they wouldn't make you feel guilty for choosing yourself, she said gently. My throat tightened. I know, I whispered. Then don't give in. If you answer them now, they win. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I'll try. But we both knew my parents weren't the kind of people to let go that easily. I had just started to relax when the knock came. Loud, insistent. I froze, my stomach twisting. Another knock, followed by my mother's voice. Calla, sweetheart, open the door. My pulse pounded in my ears. They wouldn't. They couldn't have driven all the way to Seattle just because I hadn't answered my phone. But as I crept toward the peephole and saw my mother standing there, her coat wrapped tightly around her, her face twisted with worry, I realized, yes, they absolutely would. For a moment, I considered pretending I wasn't home, but I knew her. She wouldn't leave until I let her in. Taking a steadying breath, I unlocked the door. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes, her lips trembling. Oh, sweetheart, she whispered, stepping forward as if to hug me. I held up a hand. No, she stopped, blinking. Mom, what are you doing here? My voice was sharper than I intended. She clutched her purse, glancing around the hallway as if she were afraid someone would hear. Calla, please, don't do this. We're family. I exhaled slowly. Number you did this. Her expression crumbled. I know you're upset, but I'm not upset. I'm done. Her eyes filled with fresh tears. Silas, he needs this more than you. You have everything. I clenched my fists. And that's my fault? She flinched. You had every opportunity to help him, I said, my voice steady now. But instead, you chose to punish me for being responsible. She shook her head quickly. It's not like that. Then what is it like, Mom? She inhaled sharply, looking at me as if I was the one breaking her heart. And then, her voice dropped to a whisper. If you walk away from us, you'll regret it. I went cold. That wasn't a plea, it was a warning. I stared at her for a long moment, then stepped back and gripped the edge of the door. Good night, Mom. And before she could say another word, I shut the door in her face. I stood there for a moment, my heart hammering. Then, for the first time in my life, I locked the door on my mother. When my father called the next morning, I knew this wasn't over. I stared at the screen, his name glowing under the early morning light, filtering through my bedroom window. My instinct was to ignore it. After last night, after shutting the door on my mother, I had no energy left for another fight. But I also knew my father. He wasn't the type to leave things unresolved. If I ignored him, he'd find another way to get to me. With a deep breath, I picked up. I think it's time we talk, Calla, he said, skipping any pleasantries. His tone was clipped, controlled. I sat up, rubbing the exhaustion from my face. Talk about what, exactly? This situation you've created, he replied, as if I had forced all of this upon them. It's getting out of hand. We need to put an end to this childish behavior. I clenched my jaw. Childish behavior? Standing up for myself after years of being treated like an afterthought was childish? You're not going to guilt-trip me into fixing this for you, I said, keeping my voice level. He exhaled, clearly frustrated. I'm asking you to meet me, face to face, so we can settle this. That's not unreasonable, is it? I hesitated. I knew this wouldn't be an honest conversation. It would be an ambush, just like every other time they had tried to wear me down. But curiosity pulled at me. Maybe a part of me still wanted answers. Maybe I wanted to see how far they were willing to go. Fine, I said, but we meet on my terms. Silence. Then, begrudgingly, "Where?" I chose a neutral spot. A cafe downtown. Somewhere public, where they couldn't cause a scene. And where I could walk away. I arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early, hoping to get my bearings before they showed up. But when I stepped inside, my stomach twisted. They were already there, and they weren't alone. Silas sat beside my father, leaning back in his chair, looking completely at ease. My mother, seated across from them, had a carefully composed expression, like she had rehearsed how this would go. So this wasn't a conversation, it was an intervention. I swallowed the irritation bubbling up inside me and approached. The moment I sat down, my father wasted no time. "We need to end this nonsense," he said, folding his hands on the table. "You're making a mistake, Calla." I raised an eyebrow. "Am I? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're the ones who lied to me." Silas let out a scoff. "Seriously, Calla? You're really making this a big deal?" I turned to him. "I'm sorry, did you just say this isn't a big deal? You, who was gifted a trust fund worth more than most people will see in their lifetime?" He rolled his eyes. "It's just money. You'll be fine without it." I forced a laugh. "Easy to say when you're the one benefiting." My father cut in, voice firm. "Enough! This is getting us nowhere." I exhaled sharply, pressing my palms against the cool surface of the table. "Then tell me, Dad, what exactly do you want from me?" My mother leaned forward, her voice soft. "We want our family back." A bitter taste filled my mouth. "Your family? I was never actually part of it, was I?" She flinched, but my father didn't miss a beat. "Calla, let's be realistic. Silas needs us. You don't." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. There it was, the confirmation of what I had always known but never let myself believe. I sat back, fingers curling into my lap. "So that's what this is. You made a choice, and it wasn't me." "You're making it sound worse than it is," my mother murmured, shaking her head. I stared at her. "Am I?" Silence. Then my father exhaled, rubbing his temple. "We're done playing games, Calla. This is your decision to make. You either stay with your family and support us, or you walk away for good." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "If you want to keep acting like you're not part of this family, then don't expect to come back." Something inside me cracked. It wasn't anger, not shock either. It was something deeper. Finality. I picked up my coffee, took a slow sip, and set it down carefully before meeting his gaze. "If that's how you see it," I said quietly, "then I choose myself." My mother let out a shaky breath. My father's expression darkened. Silas smirked, as if he had won, but I felt nothing but clarity. I stood, grabbing my bag. "If you walk away, Calla," my father said, his voice low, warning, "don't expect to come back." I nodded, adjusting the strap on my shoulder. I wasn't planning to. As I turned to leave, Silas let out a dry laugh. "You'll regret this." I looked over my shoulder, met his smug gaze, and let the words roll off my tongue with certainty. "Number I won't." I thought I had won, but I underestimated just how far they would go. That night, I sat on my couch with a glass of wine in hand, staring out the window at the city lights. For the first time in years, I felt free. No more walking on eggshells. No more bending over backward for people who never saw me as enough. Jordan sat across from me, her feet tucked beneath her as she sipped her own wine. She studied me for a moment, then smirked. "You look weirdly peaceful for someone who just set their family on fire." I chuckled. "It feels good. Better than I thought it would." She tilted her head, swirling her drink. "You sure it's over?" I exhaled, sinking deeper into the couch. They made their choice. I made mine. What else is there to say? Jordan set her glass down, her expression turning serious. "Calla, they're not going to accept this. You know that, right?" I waved a hand dismissively. Let them try. She didn't look convinced. Just be careful. I know you think this is done, but people like them, they don't let go without a fight. I rolled my eyes. Jordan, I appreciate the concern, but what are they going to do? Cut me out of their will twice? She sighed, muttering something under her breath, but didn't press the issue. I should have listened to her. The next morning, I was knee-deep in emails at work when my phone rang. I barely glanced at the screen before answering. Calla Whitmore. Good morning, Ms. Whitmore, a professional voice responded. This is Rachel from First National Bank. We're just calling to confirm your recent loan application. I blinked, frowning. I'm sorry, what? Your loan application, she repeated. The request was submitted yesterday, with your brother, Silas Whitmore, listed as a co-signer. We just need a few final verifications before proceeding. The room suddenly felt too small, too warm. I didn't apply for a loan, I said, forcing my voice to remain even. There was a pause on the other end. I see. Well, the application was submitted under your name. Would you like to dispute this? I pushed back from my desk, my heart pounding. Yes, immediately. Understood. We'll freeze the application for now and launch an internal review. I barely registered her parting words before hanging up. My hands trembled as I stared at my phone, the weight of what had just happened settling in. Silas. He had used my name, my credit, my trust. And for what? I clenched my jaw and hit call before I could talk myself out of it. Silas answered on the third ring, sounding annoyingly casual. Hey, sis. You applied for a loan in my name? My voice came out sharp, shaking with barely contained fury. There was a pause. Then, instead of guilt, I heard amusement. Oh, that. Yeah, don't freak out. It's just a short-term thing. I gripped my phone tighter. A short-term thing? Are you out of your mind? He exhaled dramatically. Relax, Calla. You've got great credit. It's not like it'll hurt you. That's not the point, I snapped. You committed fraud. Oh, come on. It's not fraud if we're family, he said, like I was the one being unreasonable. I nearly laughed at the sheer audacity. Cancel it, right now. He hummed as if considering it, then chuckled. You're acting like this is a big deal. It is a big deal, Silas. Do you have any idea what you've done? If this goes through, I'll be responsible for your debt. Do you really think I'm just going to let that happen? His voice lost its lightness. You're overreacting. I gritted my teeth. I swear to God, if you don't fix this, I will take legal action. Silence. Then his voice turned smug again. Go ahead. Mom and Dad will back me. My stomach dropped. Of course they were involved. I ended the call before I could say something I couldn't take back. But I wasn't done. My mother answered after 2 rings, her voice calm, too composed. Calla, I was wondering when you'd call. Don't act like you don't know why. My voice was ice. What the hell did you and Silas just try to pull? She sighed, as if I was being difficult. Sweetheart, Silas needed help, and we knew you wouldn't give it to him. I gripped the phone tighter. So you thought stealing my identity was the next best option? Don't be dramatic, she said smoothly. It's just a loan, and you have so much more than he does. I felt my stomach churn. You think this is about money? Of course it is, my father's voice cut in. I hadn't even realized he was on speaker. You've made it very clear where your priorities are. We simply did what was necessary. I let out a bitter laugh. Necessary? You forced my name onto a loan application. We forced nothing, my father said, voice cold. You forced our hand, Calla. And there it was. They truly, genuinely believed I owed them, that my entire existence revolved around their needs, their choices. My mother sighed again, as if I was the one being irrational. You're making this harder than it has to be. Something in me snapped. You know what? My voice was steady, deadly calm. I'm done talking to you. Calla. I hung up. They had made their move. Now it was my turn. I sat in my office for a long moment, my hands curled into fists. Then, I picked up my phone and dialed. A firm, professional voice answered. Miriam Carter's office. I need to block my brother from ever using my name again, I said, my voice like steel. What do I need to do? I thought blocking him financially would be enough. I was wrong. Sitting in Miriam Carter's law office, I felt the weight of the last 48 hours pressing down on me. The sleek, modern decor of her downtown Seattle firm should have been calming, but instead, it made my reality all the more surreal. I was here, sitting across from a lawyer, because my own family had made me their target. Miriam flipped through the bank records I had sent her, her expression unreadable. When she finally looked up, she didn't seem the least bit surprised. Families pull stunts like this more often than you think, she said, leaning back in her chair. It's not uncommon for financial abuse to come from the people closest to us. I clenched my hands together. I don't understand how they thought I wouldn't find out. She gave a small, knowing smile. Because they assumed you wouldn't fight back. Well, they were wrong. I sat up straighter. I want full financial protection. No more chances. I don't want Silas to have access to anything tied to my name. Miriam nodded. We can file paperwork immediately to revoke his co-signing privileges and put fraud alerts on all your accounts. That'll prevent any further unauthorized transactions. Good, I said. And what about my parents? Her expression tightened. That's trickier. If they're acting under Silas's name or convincing banks that they have your permission, they might still find loopholes. I can have everything flagged, but they'll escalate, I finished for her. She sighed, tapping her pen against the desk. Be prepared for them to retaliate. I wasn't just prepared. I was ready. The call from Silas came that evening. I was curled up on my couch, flipping through TV channels aimlessly, when my phone rang. His name flashed across the screen, and for a split second, I debated letting it go to voicemail. But I didn't. I wanted to hear just how desperate he had become. I pressed answer. Are you serious, Calla? His voice was already raised. You're ruining my life over nothing. I rolled my eyes. Nothing? You stole my information to take out a loan, Silas. That's not nothing. Oh, come on, he groaned. You have no idea what you've just done. I crossed my legs, forcing my tone to stay even. Actually, I do. I protected myself. Maybe you should try doing the same. There was silence, and then a bitter laugh. You think this is over? I know it is, I said. And then, before he could get another word in, I hung up. For the first time, I felt a rush of satisfaction. He was furious, which meant I had taken something from him. His control over me. I should have known better than to think that was the end of it. The next day at work, I was in the middle of a meeting when my phone vibrated. One notification, then another, and another. I discreetly glanced down at my screen, my stomach tightening. Missed call, Mom. Missed call, Dad. Missed call, Mom. Before I could even process that, a message popped up. Mom. Calla, we're here. We need to talk. Here? Dread pooled in my stomach. I muttered a quick excuse to my colleagues and slipped out of the meeting room, heading straight for the lobby. And there they were. My mother sat on one of the pristine couches, clutching her purse, her eyes already watery as if she had been rehearsing tears before I arrived. My father stood beside her, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. I approached, pulse pounding. What the hell are you doing here? Lenora blinked up at me, eyes filled with practiced sadness. We just want to talk. At my workplace? I hissed, glancing around. A few employees were already staring. She sniffled. You won't answer our calls, Calla. What were we supposed to do? Maybe take the hint. Reginald stepped forward, his face void of warmth. You embarrassed your own family with this stunt. Do you even realize the damage you're causing? I scoffed. You mean the damage you caused by trying to use me as your personal ATM? His jaw tensed. That's not how this works. You don't get to cut us off just because you're upset. I don't? I asked, my voice cold. Because that's exactly what I just did. My mother's lip trembled. Calla, please, we're family. You're pushing us away. You pushed me away first, I said, and you made it clear where I stood. Her face twisted with emotion, but I wasn't sure if it was genuine heartbreak or just another manipulation tactic. Mom, Dad, leave, I said through clenched teeth. For a moment, they didn't move. Then, my father exhaled sharply and turned on his heel. My mother hesitated, as if hoping I would change my mind. But when I didn't, she rose and followed him. I let out a shaky breath. But just as they reached the glass doors, my father paused. Without turning back, he muttered, just loud enough for me to hear, "You'll regret this, Calla." I went cold. It wasn't a plea, it was a threat. I didn't go back to my meeting. I went straight to my office, locked the door, and pulled out my phone. Miriam answered after one ring. Calla? What's my next step if they escalate? I asked, my voice steady, but my hands clenched into fists. Because I knew this wasn't over. It was only the beginning. I thought my father's words were just empty threats, until I realized he wasn't bluffing. Sitting on my couch, I traced the rim of my wineglass with my finger, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. Across from me, Jordan watched with narrowed eyes, her own drink untouched. So, they showed up at your job? She asked, voice carefully controlled. I nodded, rubbing at my temple. Unannounced, in the middle of the day, like they had every right to be there. Jordan let out a low whistle. They're getting desperate, I scoffed. Desperate? They threatened me. My father told me I'd regret cutting them off. She leaned forward. And that's exactly why this is a good thing. I shot her a look. Come again? Jordan shrugged. It means they're losing, Calla. People only lash out like this when they feel powerless. I wanted to believe that. But my father wasn't the type to accept defeat so easily. I took a slow sip of my drink and murmured, I hope you're right. Deep down, I knew she wasn't. The next day, I was at work, half buried in emails, when my phone lit up with an incoming call from an unknown number. I ignored it at first, but when the same number called again minutes later, I sighed and picked up. Calla Whitmore speaking. Ms. Whitmore, this is Angela from First National Bank. We detected an attempted login to your online banking profile from an unrecognized device. We wanted to verify. Was this you? My stomach dropped. No, I said sharply, sitting up straighter. That wasn't me. There was a pause on the other end. Understood. We've temporarily locked your account for security purposes. Would you like to update your passwords now? I barely heard her. My pulse pounded in my ears. Someone had tried to get into my bank account, and I knew exactly who. I'll be down there in person, I said before hanging up. Grabbing my bag, I stormed out of the office. Sitting in my car, I clenched my phone so hard my knuckles ached. Without thinking, I called the one person I knew was behind this. My father answered on the second ring, his tone infuriatingly casual. Calla? Finally decided to call your old man? I didn't even try to contain my rage. Did you try to hack into my accounts? There was silence. Then a slow exhale. I was making sure you weren't making any foolish decisions, he said smoothly. I nearly screamed. Are you out of your mind? You had no right. You forced our hand, Calla, he said, voice calm, as if we were discussing the weather. If you won't help this family, don't be surprised when we find other ways. I was shaking now. This isn't helping. This is theft. Watch your tone, young lady, he snapped. We're your parents. We're just looking out for you. I gritted my teeth. I don't need you looking out for me. Stay out of my life. I hung up before he could respond. My whole body trembled with fury. This wasn't just control. This was war. And I wasn't about to let them win. Miriam's office was cold, sterile, and exactly where I needed to be. She barely looked surprised as I explained everything. Silas, the fraudulent loan, my father's latest stunt. I need to make sure they never touch anything of mine again, I said, voice tight. Miriam nodded. We'll file for a financial protection order immediately. That'll ensure they can't access, manipulate, or falsely claim anything in your name. I exhaled sharply. Good. And a restraining order? She folded her hands on the desk. That's trickier. The courts usually require a physical altercation or direct threats of violence, but we can build a case for harassment. I clenched my jaw. Do whatever it takes. She slid the paperwork across the desk. I didn't hesitate. I signed. This was it. I was officially severing them from my life. But just as I stood to leave, my phone buzzed. An email. I glanced down, and my blood ran cold. Subject, urgent HR meeting. I had a bad feeling about this. When I walked into the HR office, I realized exactly what my father had done. The moment I stepped inside, I could feel the tension in the room. The HR manager, a woman named Susan, sat stiffly behind her desk, avoiding direct eye contact as she gestured for me to take a seat. I had been through enough meetings in my career to recognize the signs. This wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. I forced myself to stay calm as I lowered into the chair. I got an email saying this was urgent. What's going on? Susan cleared her throat, glancing down at a printed document in front of her. Calla, we received a formal complaint about you. My stomach clenched. From who? She hesitated before sliding the paper across the desk. Your father. I stared at the document, my heart pounding as I read the words printed in neat, professional font. I'm reaching out of concern for my daughter, Calla Whitmore. She has been displaying erratic and unstable behavior in recent weeks. I fear she may be struggling mentally and could pose a risk to herself or others. As her father, I feel it is my duty to notify you before this escalates further. I gripped the edge of the chair, my nails digging into the fabric. Susan shifted uncomfortably. I know this is a personal matter, but given the nature of the complaint, we had to investigate. I forced a breath through my nose, working to keep my voice level. You understand this is a lie, right? She nodded, but still looked uneasy. We're not making any assumptions. But when a concern like this is raised, especially from a family member, we have to at least have a conversation. Of course. My father knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't trying to get me fired. He was trying to plant doubt, make me look unstable. If I lost my temper here, it would only work in his favor. I straightened my posture, smoothing my hands over my lap. I appreciate that you have to do your due diligence, but let me be clear. This is nothing more than an attempt to manipulate me. My father is retaliating because I recently cut off contact with him due to his financial and emotional abuse. Susan exhaled, nodding. That makes sense. And to be honest, we don't have any concerns about your performance here. I just needed to hear your side. I met her gaze. Then I assume we can dismiss this? She hesitated. We will, unless further issues arise. I clenched my teeth. Further issues, meaning my father had already planted the seed of doubt, meaning that if he tried something again, they might not be as quick to dismiss it. I pushed down the simmering rage and forced a tight smile. Thank you for letting me clear that up. The moment I stepped out of the HR office, I pulled out my phone and dialed. He picked up on the first ring. Calla? My father said smoothly, as if he had been expecting me. What the hell was that? I hissed, barely able to keep my voice steady. What was what? He replied, feigning innocence. Don't play games with me, Dad. You called my employer and tried to sabotage my job. He exhaled, like I was exhausting him. I was concerned about you, Calla, that's all. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the phone tighter. Concerned? You tried to paint me as unstable. He was silent for a beat. Then, with a casual tone that sent ice through my veins, he said, You've been making reckless choices. I was merely looking out for you. I let out a slow, measured breath. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to tell him exactly what I thought of him. But I realized something in that moment. If I lashed out, I'd be giving him exactly what he wanted. So instead, I lowered my voice, keeping it steady and firm. This is your last warning, I said. Stay out of my life. I hung up before he could respond. And then, before I could second-guess myself, I called Miriam. She didn't even try to hide her anger when I told her what had happened. "This is defamation, Kayla," she said, her voice sharp. "We can take legal action." I exhaled. "What would that look like?" "We start with a cease and desist letter," she said. "It's a formal legal warning. If he continues, we file a lawsuit for defamation and harassment." I nodded, already knowing my answer. "Do it." She paused. "You realize this will escalate things, right?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Miriam, it's already escalated," she sighed. "I'll have the papers drafted by tomorrow." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was taking control. But the moment I left Miriam's office, my phone buzzed. I glanced down at the screen, my stomach twisting at the notification. Security alert. Unauthorized access attempt. I clicked the notification. Flagged login attempt. Your account was accessed by an unrecognized device. And then, at the bottom of the screen, the name of the person tied to the attempt. Lenora Whitmore. This time, it was my mother. I expected my father to escalate, but I never thought my mother would join him. Sitting at my desk, I felt a hollow weight settle in my chest as I stared at the security notification on my phone. Unauthorized access attempt detected account holder. Calla Whitmore flagged login attempt. Lenora Whitmore. My fingers hovered over the screen, my mind struggling to catch up with what I was seeing. My mother. I had braced myself for my father's retaliation, for his cold, calculated attempts to destroy my stability. But this was something else entirely. Before I could process the full impact, my desk phone rang. My personal banker's number flashed on the screen. I lifted the receiver with a tight grip. "This is Calla." "Ms. Whitmore," the bank representative said, his voice neutral but clipped. "We wanted to confirm an attempted modification on your account today. A request was made to update access permissions under the name Lenora Whitmore. Was this authorized?" I felt my stomach turn. "No." My voice came out sharp, unwavering. "Absolutely not." A brief pause. "Understood. We've flagged the attempt and locked any further changes pending your direct approval." I swallowed the rising lump in my throat. "Did she access anything?" "No funds were withdrawn," he reassured me. "But the request included adding a secondary user with full financial control." I nearly dropped the phone. She hadn't just tried to access my money, she had tried to take control of it. "Keep everything locked down," I said, my voice tight. "I'll be in touch if I need further action." The moment I hung up, I exhaled shakily and pressed my fingers to my temple. My father had declared war. And now, my mother had chosen his side. I sat in my apartment, staring at my phone, my pulse thrumming in my ears. I had no choice. I had to call her. It rang twice before she answered. "Calla," she said softly, like she had been waiting for this call. I didn't waste time. "Tell me you didn't just try to access my bank account." A silence stretched between us, then a sigh. "Sweetheart, we just needed a little help." I closed my eyes. There it was. No denial, no hesitation, just quiet justification. I gritted my teeth. "You're stealing from me, Mom." "Stealing?" she repeated, her voice laced with hurt. "Is that what you think this is?" "What else would you call it?" I snapped. "You went behind my back. You used my name. You tried to take control of my money." Her voice softened into something pleading. "Calla, your father and we're struggling. We've supported you your entire life. Is it so much to ask that you help us now?" A bitter laugh escaped me. "You supported me?" "No, Mom. I supported you. I paid your bills. I covered your expenses. I did everything you ever asked of me, and it was never enough." "That's not fair," she whispered. "We're your parents. We deserve your help." "Deserve." The word sliced through me like a blade. I had done everything right. I had been the responsible one, the dependable one. And for what? To be treated like my success made me an obligation? I inhaled sharply. That's not how this works. Before she could respond, another voice cut in. You're being dramatic, Calla. My father. Of course. Of course you're listening in, I muttered. This has gone on long enough, he said, his voice infuriatingly measured. You're making this harder than it has to be. You're going to regret this behavior. Something inside me snapped. I'm going to regret it? I repeated. You tried to sabotage my job. You broke into my accounts. And now you have the nerve to act like I'm the problem? My mother made a small noise, but I wasn't sure if it was a protest or just guilt. I clenched my jaw. You don't get to manipulate me anymore. This is over. Don't call me again. And then, with shaking hands, I hung up. I didn't wait. I drove straight to Miriam's office. She took one look at me and sighed. What did they do now? I dropped into the chair across from her desk. They're still trying to access my finances. This time, it was my mother. Miriam's expression darkened. We're filing a financial restraining order. I exhaled, my body heavy with exhaustion. Will it be enough? It'll be a start, she said, already pulling up the necessary documents. They won't be able to legally interfere with your assets again. I nodded, barely hesitating as I signed the paperwork. A restraining order, against my own parents. A year ago, I would have never imagined it would come to this. But they had forced my hand. This was my line in the sand. I left Miriam's office feeling lighter. Not happy, not relieved, but lighter. Like I had finally taken one more piece of my life back. But then my phone buzzed. An email notification. From landlord's office. Subject. Notice. Your rent has been unpaid for 2 months. Immediate action required. My blood turned to ice. I knew I had paid my rent. I had autopay set up. There was no way. I clicked the message, scanning the details. My rent had been paid, but then, a few weeks ago, a cancellation request had been submitted by someone using my name. My hands shook as I scrolled to the bottom. The request had been confirmed under a verified phone number, my mother's number. They hadn't just tried to take my money. They were trying to take my home. I thought I had control over my life, until I realized they were still pulling the strings. I sat frozen on the edge of my bed, my phone still clutched in my hand. The email from my landlord glowed on the screen like a warning siren. Notice. Your rent has been unpaid for 2 months. Immediate action required. This had to be a mistake. I scrambled to log into my bank account, my fingers trembling. My rent was on autopay. I had set it up years ago to avoid exactly this kind of issue. There was no way I had missed 2 payments. But the moment I pulled up my transaction history, my stomach lurched. The payments were gone, not just delayed. Gone. 2 months of rent that should have been deducted had never even processed. My balance was untouched, like the payments had never been scheduled in the first place. It didn't make sense. Unless, a cold wave of realization crashed over me. I clicked on the billing settings, my pulse hammering. My landlord's account should have been listed as the recipient of my payments, but it wasn't. Instead, the payments had been rerouted to an entirely different account. A name flashed on the screen, one I knew too well, Lenora Whitmore. I felt the air leave my lungs. My own mother had intercepted my rent payments. She had deliberately sabotaged me. A slow, sickening rage burned in my chest. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mistake. This was a message. They wanted to remind me that no matter how far I tried to run, they could still reach me. I stood abruptly, grabbing my keys. This ended today. The bank smelled like disinfectant and corporate efficiency, like a place where things were supposed to be orderly, logical, untouchable. Except my life had been anything but untouchable lately. A banker named Derek greeted me, his professional smile faltering slightly when I sat down across from him, jaw clenched. I need to understand something, I said, keeping my voice steady. 2 months ago, my autopay for rent was changed. I never authorized that. Can you tell me who did? He typed into his computer, his brows knitting together. A few moments passed before his eyes flickered. with something like concern. "It looks like the request to update your billing details came from an authorized user," he said carefully. My stomach tightened. "What authorized user?" He turned the screen toward me. And there it was. The email address used for the request, Lenora Whitmore. I sat back in my chair, exhaling sharply. She hadn't just taken my money. She had wanted me to feel it. Derek cleared his throat. "Would you like us to investigate this as fraudulent activity?" I swallowed, my hands curling into fists. "Yes," he nodded, already moving to flag the transactions. "I'll make sure those funds are recovered. But given that this was a direct family member, I'd recommend putting additional security measures on your accounts to prevent future incidents." I let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, trust me, that's already in motion." I dialed my mother's number the moment I got back to my car. She answered on the first ring. "Calla, sweetheart," she said, her voice perfectly smooth, as if she hadn't just tried to screw me over. I gritted my teeth. "Fix it, now." A pause. Then, the fakest sigh I had ever heard. "Oh, darling, you're overreacting." I closed my eyes, inhaling sharply. "You stole from me, Mom." "We didn't steal anything," she said, like I was being ridiculous. "We were just reallocating resources. You have more than enough, Calla. We were only looking out for you." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "By rerouting my rent payments to yourself? Are you kidding me?" Her voice softened. "Calla, you have to understand. We were just trying to make sure you didn't do anything reckless." Reckless. That word made my blood boil. They didn't see me as independent. They didn't see me as a grown woman who had built a life of her own. To them, I was still something to be managed, controlled, owned. My father's voice cut in, and I felt my stomach twist. "You're making a mistake, Calla." I gripped my phone tighter. "No," I said, voice calm but seething. "The mistake was ever trusting you." And I hung up. For good. Miriam's office had become my war room. She barely raised an eyebrow when I stormed in. "What now?" "They hacked my rent payments," I said, dropping into the chair across from her. "It was my mother this time." She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "All right, here's what we do." She pulled up a file on her screen, already prepping documents. "We're taking full legal action," she said. "We'll recover your funds, and we'll file fraud charges against both of them." I nodded, pulse steady. "And the protection order?" She nodded. "It's going through today." A silence stretched between us. Finally, she leaned forward, studying me carefully. "You know this is the last step, right?" she said. "Once we do this, there's no going back." I met her gaze, unflinching. "I don't want to go back." She nodded once, then clicked submit. That was it. The ties were severed. For good. That night, as I sat in my apartment, I finally felt something close to peace. It wasn't over, not yet, but I had done everything I could to protect myself. I picked up my phone, checking for any new messages. And then, just as I was about to set it down, a notification popped up. New message from unknown number. My brows furrowed as I clicked it open. "Silas, you just made a huge mistake." My stomach twisted. For the first time, I realized this wasn't over. Not even close. I thought my parents were my biggest problem, until Silas made his move. The message from my brother sat on my screen like a lit fuse. "Silas, you just made a huge mistake." I stared at it, my heart pounding in my chest. Before I could even process what he meant, another message followed. "Silas, fix this, or you'll regret it." A cold shiver crawled up my spine. Silas had always been entitled, lazy, and manipulative. But this was something different. This was a threat. I tightened my grip on my phone. My parents had tried to ruin me through manipulation, through slow, insidious control. But Silas? He wasn't patient. He wasn't calculated like them. He was reckless. And that made him dangerous. I took a deep breath, willing my hands to stop shaking. Whatever he was planning, I needed to be ready. I wasn't about to let him win. The next morning, my phone buzzed with multiple notifications. I rubbed my eyes, barely awake, as I reached for it. But the moment I saw the messages, I bolted upright. Fraud alert. Unusual activity detected on your credit account. Fraud alert. Large purchase flagged for verification. Fraud alert. Suspicious transactions reported. My stomach flipped. I clicked into the alerts, my pulse skyrocketing as I scanned the transactions. $2,500. Designer clothing store, $1,800. Electronics purchase, $4,000. High-end jewelry charge after charge, all on my credit cards. I scrambled to call the bank, my fingers barely working as I punched in the number. After an agonizing wait, a representative finally answered. "This is Stephanie from Card Services. How can I help you today?" "There's fraud on my account," I said quickly. "I didn't make these purchases." She clicked away at her keyboard. "I see several flagged transactions. Let me verify something. These purchases were made online, linked to a shipping address on file." My breath caught. "Whose address?" A brief pause. Then, "A Mr. Silas Whitmore." I squeezed my eyes shut. Silas had done it. He hadn't just threatened me. He had acted. He had gone into full-on theft, using my credit cards to fund his pathetic lifestyle. I exhaled sharply. "Shut it all down. Every card. Freeze everything." "Yes, ma'am," Stephanie said quickly. "We'll initiate a fraud investigation." I wasn't done yet. I was going to make damn sure he never got away with this. Fury propelled me forward as I pulled into the parking lot outside Silas's apartment. I barely remembered the drive over. My vision had tunneled, my mind singularly focused. I stormed up the steps, fists clenched. The moment I reached his door, I pounded on it so hard my knuckles ached. It swung open a few moments later. Silas stood there, looking bored, like he had expected me. "Wow," he drawled, leaning against the frame. "Didn't think you'd show up so fast." I pushed past him, stepping inside. "What the hell did you do?" He didn't even flinch. He just smirked. "Consider it payback for what you did to Mom and Dad." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Payback? You stole from me." He shrugged. "You'll get the money back eventually." I stared at him in disbelief. The audacity. The entitlement. "You don't even feel bad, do you?" I whispered. His smirk faltered, just for a second. Then, he folded his arms. "Come on, Calla. You wouldn't actually do anything. You wouldn't turn in your own brother." For a brief moment, something inside me hesitated. But then I remembered everything. The manipulation, the stolen money, the way my parents had always shielded him, always let him get away with everything. And I realized, he truly believed I wouldn't follow through. That was his mistake. I took a slow, deliberate step back. "Watch me." I turned on my heel and walked out, ignoring the way his smugness evaporated into something closer to uncertainty. He was going to learn right now that I wasn't his safety net anymore. Miriam barely blinked when I told her what happened. "Are you ready to press charges?" she asked. I hesitated, just for a second. This was my brother. Then I thought about all the sacrifices I had made, the years of being the responsible one, the way my parents had bled me dry, and then, even after all of that, how Silas had still chosen to steal from me. I met Miriam's gaze. "Yes," she nodded. "Then let's make sure he never does this again." That night, as I sat in my apartment, my phone rang. I answered on the first ring. "This is Officer Daniels from the Seattle PD," a male voice said. "We've located the suspect, Ms. Whitmore. Would you like to proceed with the arrest?" I closed my eyes for a brief moment. Then, with steady resolve, I whispered, "Yes." I thought this was the end of it. But my parents had one last move to play. The silence in my apartment was deafening. I sat on the couch, my phone still clutched in my hand, after confirming Silas's arrest. The weight of what I had done settled deep in my chest, pressing down like a vice. He was in custody now. For the first time in my life, I had truly cut him off. There were no more second chances, no more allowances for him to manipulate and steal. And yet, guilt gnawed at me. "He's your brother," a small voice whispered in my head. Jordan, sitting across from me, must have read my expression because she leaned forward, her tone sharp but gentle. "Don't do that, Calla." I looked up, my throat tight. She gestured toward my phone. "You're sitting there feeling guilty, aren't you?" I swallowed hard. "He's still my brother." Jordan's eyes darkened. "Number he was your thief, and he would have kept stealing if you didn't stop him." I let out a shaky breath. "He did this to himself, Calla," she continued. "You just stopped him." I nodded, gripping my hands together. I knew she was right, but I also knew my parents wouldn't take this lightly. "This isn't over," I murmured. Jordan tilted her head. "No," she agreed, "but you've made your move. Let's see how they play theirs." The call came later that night. I had just crawled into bed, exhaustion settling deep into my bones, when my phone buzzed. I almost didn't answer, almost let it go to voicemail, but some part of me knew who it was before I even looked at the screen. Mom. With a deep breath, I pressed accept. The moment I did, I heard it. The frantic, broken sobs. "Calla, please." My mother's voice came through the receiver, raw and desperate. "You can't do this to your brother." I squeezed my eyes shut. "I didn't do this." "He did," she sucked in a shaky breath. "But he's family." I exhaled slowly. "That word doesn't mean what you think it does." For a moment, all I could hear was her breathing. And then her tone shifted. Lower, steadier. "We'll make a deal," she murmured. "Drop the charges and we'll leave you alone forever." I almost laughed. Almost. It was a lie. I knew it. She knew it. Even if I let Silas go, they would never stop. There would always be another request, another expectation, another price for being their daughter. "No," I said, my voice calm, unwavering. "That's never going to happen." Silence. Then a quiet, bitter whisper. "You'll regret this." I hung up. I was done listening to threats disguised as love. I should have known my father would take things further. The next morning, I was in my office, trying to focus on work, when the receptionist called my extension. "Ms. Whitmore, your father is here to see you." The air in my lungs turned to stone. I stood slowly, gripping the edge of my desk. "Did you tell him I'm busy?" A pause. "I did, but he's refusing to leave." I exhaled sharply, my fingers pressing into my temples. There was no avoiding this. I walked out of my office and into the lobby. Reginald Whitmore stood near the entrance, arms crossed, his expression carved from stone. I squared my shoulders and met his gaze. "What are you doing here?" He didn't flinch. "We need to talk." I folded my arms. "We have nothing to talk about." His jaw tightened. "You are tearing this family apart." I laughed under my breath. "No, Dad. You did that years ago." His nostrils flared. "Drop the charges." I stared at him, disbelief washing over me. "Are you seriously demanding this in public? At my job?" "I'll do what I have to," he said flatly. "Drop them, and this all goes away." I clenched my fists. "And if I don't?" His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Then we take this public," he said smoothly. "You think you've won? You haven't seen what we're capable of." A slow, nauseating dread spread through me. They weren't fighting to win. They just wanted to make sure I lost. I took a single step forward, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "I'm not afraid of you," I whispered, "and you're never getting your claws in me again." His eyes darkened. I turned and walked away. He didn't follow. Miriam barely looked surprised when I told her what happened. "They're escalating," I said, my hands gripping the edge of her desk. "They won't stop." She nodded once. "Then it's time to file the restraining order." I exhaled slowly. A restraining order. Against my own parents. I knew this was coming. I knew it. And yet, the weight of it still made my chest ache. Once we do this, Miriam said carefully, there's no undoing it. I thought about the years of manipulation, the stolen money, the ultimatums, the way they had twisted family into a weapon against me. Then I thought about freedom. I nodded. Do it. She typed up the final documents, turned the screen toward me, and I signed. The last thread connecting me to them, legally, emotionally, was severed. For good. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, sinking into my couch. For the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe. It was over. But then, my phone buzzed. A notification popped up on my screen. News alert! A daughter's betrayal. How one woman had her own family arrested. My stomach dropped. I clicked the link, and there it was. A local journalist had run a story, one that painted me as the villain. My parents had taken this public. I thought I was done fighting them, but now the whole world knew. I woke up to the sharp buzz of my phone vibrating nonstop on my nightstand. Groggy, I reached for it, squinting against the harsh glow of the screen. Dozens of missed notifications flashed across my lock screen. Messages, missed calls, social media alerts. My stomach twisted. Before I could even process the chaos, my phone rang again. Jordan's name lit up. I swiped to answer, dread already curling around my spine. Calla, she said, her voice tight. You need to see this. I heard her typing, and a second later, my phone pinged with a new message. A link. I clicked it. And then my blood ran cold. Daughter cuts off, struggling family, gets brother arrested. That was the headline. My parents had gone to the press. The article was filled with their version of the story, a warped, twisted fabrication that made them sound like helpless victims and painted me as a heartless, ungrateful daughter. I scanned the paragraphs, my breath growing unsteady. Calla turned her back on us when we needed her the most, my mother was quoted saying. We did everything for her, and she repaid us by abandoning her own family. My father had added his own self-righteous twist. It's devastating. We raised her to be better than this. She's not the daughter we knew anymore. And the worst part? They had even defended Silas. Her own brother was struggling, and instead of helping him, she had him arrested like a common criminal. My mother sobbed in the interview. We just want our family back. A sick feeling churned in my stomach. They had weaponized my silence. And now, the world believed them. I scrolled down to the comment section, half dreading what I'd find, yet unable to look away. It was worse than I imagined. How could she do this to her own family? Blood is thicker than water. What kind of monster sends her own brother to jail? Disgusting. Hope you're happy with yourself, Calla. Comment after comment, judgment after judgment. Complete strangers tearing into me as if they knew anything about what I had been through. I swallowed hard, my fingers gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles ached. Jordan, I whispered, this is bad. People love to pick a villain, she said, and your parents made sure it was you. I took a shaky breath, scrolling further. And then I saw something that made my heart sink. Familiar names, distant relatives, old family friends. I can't believe Calla turned out like this. After everything her parents did for her, this is how she repays them? It wasn't just strangers. It was people I had known, people I had once trusted, and they had turned against me without hesitation. I set my phone down, my hands trembling. My entire reputation was being shredded in real time. And the worst part? If I didn't fight back, this was the story people would believe. I walked into Miriam's office an hour later, the article still burning in my mind. She took one look at my face and exhaled sharply. I saw the article. I collapsed into the chair across from her. They've destroyed me, I said flatly. She leaned forward. Number. They tried to destroy you, I scoffed. What am I supposed to do, just let them? Miriam shook her head. You have two options. We can file a defamation lawsuit against both your parents and the news outlet that ran this story. I blinked. A lawsuit? She nodded. They've publicly defamed you. If we can prove they lied, you have a case. I swallowed hard. And the second option? Go public, she said simply. I stiffened. What? You tell your side of the story, Miriam said. Take back control of the narrative. Right now, they own it. If you stay silent, their version of events is the only one people will ever hear. I hesitated. Fighting back publicly meant dragging everything out into the open. It meant reliving every ugly detail. But if I didn't, they won. I clenched my jaw, my decision solidifying. If I say nothing, I murmured, they win. Miriam nodded. So what do you want to do? I looked up, meeting her gaze. Let's fight. That night, I sat in my apartment, my laptop open in front of me. Jordan was next to me, watching silently as I typed. My hands hovered over the keyboard, my heart pounding. I had stayed silent for so long. I had let them dictate the story, no more. I took a deep breath, and I began to write. I have stayed silent for too long. Here's the truth. I laid it all out. The years of being used, the financial abuse, the stolen money, the fraud, the emotional manipulation. I wrote about how I had supported them for years, only to be treated like I was nothing. How they had betrayed me over and over again. How Silas had stolen from me. How my parents had covered for him, defended him, tried to ruin me just to protect him. And finally, I wrote about why I had no choice but to walk away. When I finished, my hands were shaking. I turned to Jordan. Are you sure about this? She asked. I exhaled, my chest tight. Yes. She didn't hesitate. She reached over, and she pressed post. The response was immediate. My notifications exploded. People were reading, reacting, commenting. Some were still against me, but others were starting to see the truth. If this is real, her parents are monsters. I had a family like this. Cutting them off was the best decision I ever made. People always assume the child is the problem. This proves otherwise. And then, just when I thought I could finally breathe, my phone buzzed again. A new message, from an unknown number. I clicked it open. I believe you, but you don't know everything. I stared at the words, my pulse spiking. What the hell did that mean? Just when I thought I knew the whole truth, I realized there was more to the story. The message replayed in my mind as I stared at my phone screen. I believe you, but you don't know everything. I didn't recognize the number. I should have ignored it, blocked it, moved on. But I didn't. Something about it lodged itself in my brain, refusing to let go. And when a second message came through, I knew I couldn't ignore it. Calla, it's Evelyn, your aunt. Aunt Evelyn. I barely knew her. She was my father's older sister, the black sheep of the Whitmore family. My parents rarely spoke about her, and when they did, it was always with a dismissive shake of the head. She never knew how to keep her nose out of other people's business. She was always jealous. She caused too many problems. And yet, here she was, reaching out to me. My fingers hovered over the screen. I should have hesitated more. Instead, I typed back, "What do you mean?" A few seconds later, her reply came, "Meet me tomorrow, we need to talk." I exhaled sharply, gripping my phone tighter. Whatever she had to say, I had a feeling it would change everything. The next afternoon, I found myself sitting in a quiet cafe in downtown Seattle, gripping a cup of coffee that had gone cold. I didn't know what I was expecting, but when Evelyn finally walked in, I knew immediately that she wasn't here to waste my time. She was older than I remembered, her gray-streaked brown hair tied back, her sharp eyes scanning the room before landing on me. She didn't hesitate. She walked straight over, slid into the chair across from me, and set her purse down with a quiet thud. "Calla," she said, her voice smooth but firm. I swallowed. "Evelyn." She folded her hands on the table. "You know, I always knew something like this would happen. Just didn't think it would take this long." I frowned. "What are you talking about?" She leaned forward. "Your parents. They didn't just lie to you, they stole from you. A cold chill ran down my spine. I forced out a shaky laugh. I know that, Evelyn. They drained me for years. No, she interrupted. Not just the money you gave them. Your money. Your inheritance. I blinked. My inheritance? What are you talking about? I asked slowly. Evelyn pulled out a small folder from her bag and slid it across the table. Red. I hesitated. Then, with careful fingers, I flipped it open. Inside were copies of legal documents, old ones, a trust fund, a second trust fund, not the one for Silas, one that had been meant for me. My stomach turned. I don't. What is this? My voice was barely above a whisper. Evelyn's expression softened slightly. Your grandfather set up a trust for you and Silas when you were kids. Both of you. Equal amounts. But by the time you turned 18, yours was already gone. I could barely breathe. How? I whispered. Evelyn exhaled. Your parents drained it, slowly over the years. By the time you were an adult, there was nothing left, and they never told you. Instead, they let you believe you were the one responsible for keeping them afloat. My hands clenched around the folder. It wasn't just manipulation. It wasn't just favoritism. They had robbed me blind. I shook my head, trying to process it. And Silas? Her jaw tightened. They protected his. Of course they did. I let out a hollow laugh, blinking back the sting in my eyes. Why are you telling me this now? Evelyn's lips pressed together. Because they made sure no one else would. And because I knew the moment you fought back, they'd do everything in their power to make you the villain. I exhaled slowly, my mind racing. All these years. All the times I had been made to feel selfish for setting boundaries. All the moments I had questioned if I was the problem. It had all been built on a lie. A slow-burning rage settled into my chest. I closed the folder. Thank you for telling me. Evelyn nodded. What are you going to do? I met her gaze. I'm going to make them pay. The moment I walked into Miriam's office, she took one look at my face and sighed. What happened? I tossed the folder onto her desk. I want to sue them. All of them. She arched an eyebrow, flipping through the documents. A slow whistle left her lips. Well, this changes things. They stole from me, Miriam. My voice was tight, shaking. They let me believe I was helping them while they were living off my money the whole time. Miriam nodded. We have a case, a solid one. She looked up, eyes sharp. But this is a big move, Calla. It's one thing to cut ties. It's another to take them to court. I knew that. I didn't care. I want to take legal action, I said, my voice steady. All of it. Miriam studied me for a long moment. Then she gave a small nod. Okay, let's do this. She reached for her phone. This is going to get ugly, she warned. I took a deep breath. It already is. And then, with a few calls and a signed affidavit. The lawsuit was in motion. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, my phone vibrated with a new email. I clicked it open. Notice of court filing. Whitmore versus Whitmore. It was official. I was suing my own parents. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. I stared at the court documents spread out in front of me, my signature scrawled at the bottom of the last page. My hands should have been shaking. My stomach should have been twisting itself into knots. But instead, I felt nothing but clarity. Miriam slid the papers into a folder, snapping it shut. It's done, she said, her voice even. The lawsuit is officially filed. Fraud, defamation, financial abuse, every crime they had committed against me, every secret they had buried, was now part of an official legal battle. I looked up, meeting Miriam's sharp gaze. This will go public, she warned. Are you ready for that? I exhaled slowly. They made this public first, I said. Now I'm taking the truth back. Miriam nodded. Then let's get to work. The first wave of backlash came hours later. My phone buzzed relentlessly, message after message flooding in. At first, I ignored it. I didn't need to read what I already knew was coming. But when my mother's name appeared on my screen, I hesitated. For a brief, stupid moment, I thought maybe, she was calling to finally admit the truth. I should have known better. Instead of answering, I let it go to voicemail. A second later, her text came through. "You're destroying us. Drop this now or you'll regret it." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. So much for motherly love. Then came an email from my father. "You will lose, Calla. We have nothing left to give you." The sheer arrogance of it made my blood boil. Even now, he refused to acknowledge what he had done. He thought this was about money. He didn't understand that this was about power, about control, and they were losing it. I leaned back in my chair, tapping my fingers against my desk. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one panicking. They were. But my parents weren't the only ones reacting. The internet had plenty to say too. Social media exploded within hours of the lawsuit going public. Some comments were brutal. "She's suing her own parents? What kind of person does that? Entitled brat? They raised her and she repays them with a lawsuit? Blood is thicker than water. She'll regret this one day." But then, there were the others. Good for her. Family doesn't mean free labor. This happens more than people realize. Just because someone's family doesn't mean they have a right to your life. I had parents like this. Cutting them off was the best thing I ever did. I let out a slow breath, my grip on my phone tightening. Jordan, sitting across from me, frowned as she read the comments over my shoulder. "You don't need to read this garbage, Calla." I sighed. I shook my head. I knew this would happen. I knew people would pick sides. Jordan nodded. "Yeah, but the people who matter? They already know the truth." I gave her a small smile. She was right. For every person who called me selfish, there was another who saw the reality of what I had been through. And that was enough. 2 days later, Miriam called me with the news. I picked up on the first ring. "We have a court date," she said. 2 weeks from today." I exhaled. "Then it's happening," I murmured. "It is," she confirmed. The final countdown had begun. No more threats. No more manipulation. In 2 weeks, everything would be laid bare. My parents would finally have to face the consequences of what they had done. And I would be there, standing tall. That night, as I sat in my apartment, sipping on a glass of wine, another email popped up on my screen. At first, I thought it was more hate mail, but when I clicked it open, my breath caught. From Jonathan Hale. Subject: Information regarding the Whitmore case. I frowned. Who the hell is Jonathan Hale? I skimmed the email, my eyes widening with every word. "Ms. Whitmore, I was the financial advisor who worked with your parents for several years. I have information that might help your case." My heartbeat stuttered. I reread the email. Once. Twice. Then I grabbed my phone and called Miriam. "We just got our first witness." I thought I knew everything, but this new information changed the game. Sitting in Miriam's office, I stared at the pile of documents in front of me. Richard Hayes, the former financial advisor, sat across from me, his hands folded neatly, his expression unreadable. "This is everything?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. "Every bank statement, every transfer, every shady offshore account your parents funneled money into. They siphoned money from your trust fund over the years and used it to maintain their lifestyle." I exhaled sharply. It was worse than I had imagined. Miriam, sitting beside me, flipped through the pages, her eyes narrowing. "This is more than enough to prove intentional fraud," she said. "They knew exactly what they were doing." Richard sighed. "They always did. I tried to warn them that misusing those funds could have consequences, but they didn't care. They assumed you'd never find out." Well, they were wrong. I clenched my fists. My parents had spent years making me feel like I owed them, that I was selfish for pulling away, that I was cruel for not funding their endless demands, and the whole time, they were the ones stealing from me. I swallowed back the rising fury and looked at Miriam. "This changes everything," I said. "We're going to win." She gave me a small smile. We were always going to win, Calla. But now, we're going to bury them. The next morning, I walked into the courthouse with my head held high. I had spent so much of my life feeling like I was on the losing end of my parents' manipulation, like no matter what I did, I would always be trapped under their thumb. Not today. Today, I was taking my life back. I stepped into the courtroom and saw them. My mother sat stiffly, her hands folded in her lap, her lips pressed into a thin, unreadable line. My father, ever the strategist, sat straight-backed, his expression calm. But there was tension in his shoulders, the kind of tension that told me he knew the walls were closing in. And Silas looked miserable. Good. Miriam nudged me toward our seats, and I forced myself to take a deep breath as the judge entered. The proceedings began. My father went first. "We did what we had to do," he said smoothly. "Calla always had more than enough. We simply managed things in a way that best supported our family." I scoffed under my breath, but Miriam wasn't about to let him spin his lies unchecked. She stood and laid out the bank records, the fraudulent transfers, the offshore accounts. The judge's eyes darkened as she skimmed the evidence. Then, Richard Hayes took the stand. "I worked with the Whitmores for several years," he said, "and I can confirm that they deliberately drained Calla's trust fund. They hid transactions, lied on financial statements, and ensured she had no idea where the money was going." My mother looked away, staring at the floor. My father's jaw clenched. And Silas! Silas finally realized there was no escape from this. The courtroom was silent as the judge turned to my parents. "You have anything to say for yourselves?" Reginald, my ever-proud father, held his chin high. "We were simply looking out for our son." The judge exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Looking out for one child does not justify stealing from another." And then, the ruling came down. I barely heard the words. I was too busy watching my parents' faces as reality sank in. They had lost. The judge ruled in my favor. They were ordered to repay the money they had stolen, their accounts would be audited, and they faced financial penalties for fraud. Silas would have a separate hearing for his role in the theft and identity fraud. It was over. The years of being manipulated, gaslit, controlled. They were finally over. I stood, my knees weak, my heart pounding in my chest. My parents didn't look at me as they shuffled out of the courtroom, but as I walked past them, my mother turned her head slightly and whispered, "You may have won, but you've lost your family forever." I paused. Then I smiled. That was never a family to begin with, and I walked away. Finally, I was free. This wasn't the ending I expected, but it was the one I needed. A week had passed since the trial, but the weight of it still lingered. I sat on my balcony, a cup of coffee warming my hands, the cool morning air filling my lungs. The city stretched out before me, indifferent to my battles, unmoved by my victory. And yet, for the first time in my life, I felt light. No more debt I didn't create. No more financial traps disguised as help. No more waking up to phone calls that made my stomach drop. I was free, but freedom had come at a cost. My parents' last words echoed in my head. "You may have won, but you've lost your family forever." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. Maybe they were right. Maybe the family I had always wanted, the one that valued me as more than a resource, never really existed in the first place. And maybe that was okay? All right, hold still. Jordan popped the cork on a bottle of champagne, sending a sharp pop through my apartment. "Jesus!" I laughed as she poured 2 glasses. "Trying to give me a heart attack?" She grinned. "No, I'm trying to celebrate you." I shook my head, accepting the glass she handed me. "You did it, Calla. You actually did it." I took a sip, letting the cool bubbles fizz against my tongue. For the first time in weeks, hell, years, I smiled. A real, genuine smile. Jordan raised her glass. "To new beginnings." I clinked mine against hers. To choosing myself. We drank, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was bracing for the next crisis. Later that night, I opened my laptop to check my emails, expecting nothing more than work updates and junk mail. But one subject line made my stomach drop. Mediation request. Whitmore family dispute. I hovered over it, hesitating before clicking. Ms. Whitmore, your parents have expressed interest in mediation. If you would like to discuss a possible resolution, we are available to facilitate a meeting at your convenience. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the words. After everything, after the trial, the lies, the public humiliation, they still wanted to talk? My first instinct was to slam my laptop shut and pretend I never saw it. But a part of me, some stubborn, deeply buried part, wanted to know why. Did they regret anything? Did they finally see what they had done? Or was this just another way to manipulate me? I closed my eyes, letting the question settle in my chest. And then, I made my choice. I shut the laptop. For now, I didn't need their answers. For now, I didn't need to know their why. For now, I was choosing peace. I stood, stretching, feeling the tension in my body finally begin to fade. I stepped out onto my balcony again, inhaling the crisp night air. And as I stared out at the city, I whispered the words I had been waiting my whole life to say. For the first time in my life, I'm finally free. There was a time when I thought family meant sacrifice, until I realized real love doesn't come with conditions. I spent years being used, manipulated, and cast aside when I stopped playing their game. But choosing myself wasn't selfish, it was survival. And now, I'm free. Free to live on my own terms, to surround myself with love that doesn't demand a price. If my story speaks to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because we all deserve to choose ourselves.